Today I'm with Justin Follin and Dr. David Greenspan. We dig into high-performance psychology as it relates to both people on sports teams, but also largely we focus on high-performance business. We walk through their techniques to do group surveys, 360 reviews, tilt analysis, and so much more. We also dug into my serious distaste for project managers. Well, not all of them anyway. With that, please enjoy this fun conversation with Justin Follin and David Greenspan. I have read this book. I've read every page. It was actually a quick read. It was easy. It was an easy read. I just did it on the couch. In fact, people who know me well know I'm incredibly dyslexic. So me getting through any book is a bit of a miracle, especially in the time I did. I think I powered through it in like a day and a half or something, which is, for me, it's speed reading. You know, it's like
that's great.
Off the charts fast.
Awesome.
So kudos to you for having a very legible book.
Thank you.
So before we get into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourselves? Like, what's your backgrounds?
Justin, you want to start off?
Well, my name is Justin Follin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Blue Case Strategic Partners and the author of Be a Better Team by Friday, the book you're referring to.
Yes.
I, once upon a time when I graduated from college, I was uncertain about what I wanted to do, and I was working in the banquet hall at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I was a server. And I had the opportunity to serve the basketball team on the very first night of before the very first game that the coach, Roy Williams, was going to lead them to national championship. That team had been the losingest team in the history of the school when I was there. And Roy Williams had just shown up from the University of Kansas, controversially, to lead the losingest guys to this national championship. And when I was in the back of that room, I was listening to him talk, and was literally, I felt like I could win a national championship. It was just something that kind of like lit up for me. And, you know, at that point, I'm just graduated from college. I don't know what I'm doing, but there was something about that moment that really inspired me. What was that? And he took that group to win a national championship. What is that? So I've spent my career in various capacities learning really what brings out the best in people. And high performance psychology is kind of something I started to get into when I worked as a professional coach, a performance coach. And
what does that mean? In business and physical coaching, like basketball or baseball or something? Or what?
Yeah, I was coaching really peak performance coaching. So I was working with stage performers who are getting up, musicians, visionary TED speakers. I worked with poker players. I worked with athletes just to get into a peak performance state in a high pressure situation. And a lot of that is really how do you shift your mindset and shift your state so that you would enter into a flow state, kind of like a basketball player would when they're winning national championships. So there's something about coaching specifically where you have the opportunity to help someone excel at a higher level. And so I was focusing on that peak performance psychology in my coaching. And then David and I teamed up. We had met as friends because we had a shared interest in the subjects of psychology and performance, and David had a Ph.D. in the subject. So we were
two peas in a pod there.
Yeah, exactly. And then I went to a party at his house for the first time. I saw his library of books, and I thought, I got to know this guy. You know, we had the exact same interests. So we teamed up, and David's really the founder of Blue Case. He brought me in so that I could help scale the company from a consulting practice really to a firm. And turned our methodology into clear, actionable tools that businesses that are growing can apply inside of their teams and draw from that peak performance psychology, but also from business strategy and leadership development to really get amazing results in companies that are growing. So it's kind of my backstory up to now where I'm leading that company.
Okay. How about you?
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in people who are exceptional performers, and I went and got a doctorate in that field of high performance psychology. So why do certain teams and individuals perform at exceptional levels, even in suboptimal circumstances? Even when it's tough, they hit it out of the park. And so I've been bringing that and the tools and the principles and the behaviors and mindsets into our business. And initially, I was working a lot with like Fortune 20 companies, really large companies. And then when we started Blue Case, we were working with a lot of private, fast-moving, innovative companies. And I think a lot of the CEOs that we work with just have this fire. Like they have this fire in them that they want to be great. They want to be extraordinary, and they want their teams to be extraordinary, and they believe in people, and they want to see what's possible and bring something into the world. And so there's been a nice connection between sort of what we bring and the CEOs we work with.
Mm. And so what were the books that you saw that kind of made you think I should know this guy? What were the things you guys had in common?
Oh, well, it was books about leadership, spiral dynamics, psychology, state shifting, different aspects of spirituality, just kind of like psychology things, just from different traditions and backgrounds. And both of us are interested in what's called integral psychology, which is understanding both individuals and systems. And so a lot of our shared interest was in systems thinking and how do you apply that to leadership as well as peak performance.
Integral as in derivative integral? Or?
No, not like calculus, but as like integrated, so that you're thinking about that our systems are related with each other. The psychologies, our philosophies, our public institutions, our spiritualities, they're all integrated in our societies and we have kind of different levels of understanding of how society works. And so there's representative of all kinds of people inside of an integral philosophy. It includes all of our cultures and all of our systems. And so it's kind of a vision of a different kind of leadership. And
yeah, so like some psychology, like Piaget says that adult development stops at basically age 22 when you have the ability to abstract think, which a lot of Americans actually don't even get that far. A lot of people don't make it that far, but
especially if you're on drugs.
Yeah. And part of what integral psychology talks about is that there's different levels of development. There's sort of like below average or like pre-egoic. Then there's like egoic, like healthy, normal functioning. And then there's post-egoic or extraordinary levels of performance. And it could be intellectual performance. It could be kinesthetic performance. It can be moral, spiritual development. There are these different lines. And so you want to kind of bringing all these, as you develop as a person, you can reach rare forms of human development as a leader and as a person.
Can you give me some examples of what that might actually mean in practice? Like give me like an example of somebody that I might know of that where you're like, here are some of these examples of where they're hitting some of these different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, when you think about leadership, and I'm going to simplify. We're talking about these.
Just because you covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah.
So, a really simple way to think about an integral model of leadership is when you think about a company culture. You've got at the very center of that company culture is the CEO. And a lot of times you think about the CEO at the top of the hierarchy, and then they're kind of cascading decisions. But when it comes to culture, there is the beliefs and the behaviors and the values of the CEO are usually reflected on the executive team, which extends out into the rest of the company. So if you think of a CEO who's thinking integrally, they're thinking, I have to be aware of my own self in this, my values, what I believe in, how I think of culture. I need to be aware of the system of the team that I'm in and think of there's both me individually and then us collectively. And then I have to be thinking about both the behaviors that we're doing as well as the rules that we follow. And so if you're thinking about all of that, you're being an integral leader. And many CEOs that we work with are integral in nature. We just kind of define it that way. So you can see there's what's inside of us. There's our psychology. There's our values. That's the inside stuff that no one can see but ourselves. And then the outside stuff, which is how we behave, how we act. So to be an integral leader is any CEO who's, looking at themselves and taking responsibility for their own experience. And then also leaning into what does the team need? How can I be thinking in terms of what structures do we need and what breakdowns do I need to be addressing? So really anyone who's leading can be an integral leader.
What about, you mentioned like, individual sports athletes, for instance, who may not be on a team per se. I mean, they might be a martial artist or something where, their peak has nothing to do with anybody else. I mean, maybe they have coaches and stuff, but they're out there fighting for their life by themselves effectively. Does this change? I mean, do you even need the culture in this case, or is it just, that only applies when you have teams, or sort of the same lessons, just they kind of get changed slightly, or how does that work?
Well, there is a culture there too, right? Because there's the level of trust with the coach, level of trust with all the, the nutritionists, all the people that are working with them, Are they coachable? Can they say the real conversations, or do they have to bullshit with the person? Right. So, and great athletes are going to have that kind of rapport and trust where you can say anything to one another. Now on a team, it's going to even be more important and critical because it's not just an individual star performer. It's not a hero with 1,000 helpers. It's like, you're trying to get something done through other people.
I'm a big fan of Formula One. So, if you have a rock star Formula One driver, I mean, they're nothing without their team.
Yeah.
And imagine
nothing.
One error on that tire slowing them down 1 second makes them lose in Formula One.
Like badly.
Badly. Yeah. I mean, that is the highest level of coordinated action that you could think of. They operate as a system.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about in terms of systems.
And the piece that Justin's bringing about integral is you have to pay attention to having good systems. You have to have the mindsets. You have to have individual mindsets, the collective mindset, the attitudes, the behaviors. You have to have practiced. So if you only had great systems and didn't have the right culture, you wouldn't win. If you only had the great, mindset,
or if you only have great athletes, but you don't have great systems, you're not going to win.
Right.
It's both.
Yeah. You said something about being teachable. How do you quantify that exactly?
I think we've all met people that are really smart and have incredible resumes.
Thank you so much.
And and that are they sort of suck out of all the air out of the room.
Yeah,
I know. They're incredibly arrogant. And then we've also met people that are unbelievably driven and humble at the same time. That they are, they care about you. They care about their people, even as they're driven with this incredible force, right? So I think, it's key. If you're not coachable, it doesn't matter if you're the best coach in the world. And if you are coachable, you can learn from the leaves of grass, as Walt Whitman did, right? I mean, the leaves of grass was his coach, and he took in something. So I think the quantifiable way is, does the person listen? Are they curious? Do they realize that no matter whatever level they're at, that they could be better? Because you can always be better. I mean, Bruce Lee used to say that, right? That he knew that there was always someone better. So he trained incredibly hard, right?
One of the quotes we've got is about Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella and Bill Gates saying the thing that Satya is best at is getting feedback. And that was his practice. He would go out and he would ask the people, and I'm sure it's still his practice, but he's going out and asking people, how can he improve? What should they improve? And he's just so good at giving feedback. That's why he's successful as a CEO. And to me, quantifiable is literally, how many meetings have you conducted this month where you're going out and you're sitting down and you're doing a listening tour with your staff where you're not giving them feedback, you're just asking feedback for yourself? And when I usually start a workshop and I ask that question, how many of you have had a conversation with your manager in the last month where they've asked you for feedback but have not given you any? None of them raise their hands, or one will raise their hands. That's the kind of quantifiable data is, does the leader go out and just ask for feedback about themselves? Does they ask for feedback about their team? Are they learning constantly? That's the kind of, I think, quantifiable data I would look for.
I can't remember which firm I got this information from, but it's something like 5 or 7 experiments per week. If the portfolio company runs them, this VC will know that by 52 weeks, they've run whatever amount of experiments that is, hundreds of experiments. So it's sort of like, it's a different kind of feedback, but it's that they're forcing their team to think about how they can do better at all times. Please run experiments. Please tell us how those experiments go. Because you might not have any idea what to do, but the data will quickly inform you of where you're screwing up and where you could do better. So that's kind of the routinized mechanical version of what you just described. But to turn that more to human side, that's like the 360 review or whatever.
Yeah. And think about an athlete. Think about the level, like a peak performing athlete. Think of Serena Williams, right? So like she played tennis while she was pregnant, right? Like a championship and won, right? Think about like how often she's getting feedback from people. like how quick it is and how fast, and any kind of athlete. They're getting feedback from their weightlifting coach, from their nutritionist, from their swing coach, from their mental coach. And it's constant, and it's adjusting their performance in the moment, right? And they're seeing films, they're watching game films of themselves, right? It's not a 360 review at 6 months after, they wouldn't be able to improve so quickly. So they're improving so fast. When a halftime's called, people are getting incredible feedback. They're shouting things in, right? So, but in business, a lot of times people are getting feedback like twice a year, and you do a 360 review. Well, why do athletes perform at such exceptional levels? How are people winning the Olympic gold? Because they're getting feedback, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day from experts, and they trust them, and they're taking it and adjusting performance immediately. And so as we can begin to start getting feedback as frequently as athletes, the performance improves really quickly. So Justin has this great saying that, takes 10,000 hours to master something. We believe we can cut it in half with great feedback.
One of the chapters of our book is give feedback like a coach for this reason. And when you think about feedback, usually you think that's just really negative criticism. What the Harvard Business Review found was negative criticism actually defeats the purpose, because people go into a fight or flight state. So they're not actually in the learning center of their mind. They're in guarded mind.
I will caveat that with one thing. This is on the psychology side, actually. One thing we found when we're trying to do security training is most of the time security training just bounces right off people's brains. They just will not accept it. It doesn't work. But if you do it in a moment that they think that they have been compromised, for whatever reason, they're having this massive flood of biochemical stuff going on, like the tiger almost ate them. And their brain just like the aperture opens up, and they can learn anything extremely rapidly, and they'll never forget it ever. The window is short. They won't learn for very long. But if you just give them very targeted information in that very specific time frame, they'll learn it and they'll never forget. So, like for instance, if they think they clicked a phishing email, they think they gave up their username and password, and you're like, you were hacked, and like they're like, oh, and like, and also your boss is gonna get this email, like, and like, what's going on? And then it's like, here's how to not have this ever happen again. They're like, okay, now, oh, nothing's happening. Oh God, and they're kind of like relaxed, but you can get really good training shoved right into their eyeballs. This is a dirty trick, by the way, but it does work.
Well.
Strangely effective.
Makes sense.
And I think it is important because of, at least my understanding, there's this part of our brain called the amygdala that gets set off when we're in that fight or flight stage. And it is associated with learning and memory. So it's I would say it's a distinct kind of learning. It's a learning in emergency where it has to kind of implant and be in the fight or flight, because that's probably what you'll be in a security situation. You want that level. In a management situation, if you've got everybody learning that way and they're in total fight or flight and shock all the time, you might have an issue with your team. What we're looking for is creativity and innovation, and really that peak performance flow state, which is actually a combination of a very specific amount of stress along with ease. And that's when you find like Michael Jordan, he's in the zone, man. He is not stressed. He's completely, he's shooting the ball totally in the zone. He describes it as time disappears. That's the flow state. And you have to have just the right amount of stress and just the right amount of ease in it for that flow state, creativity state.
What is the stress? How do you invoke the amount of stress necessary?
Good question. One of our first chapters is choose your mindset. And the mindset of invoking the stress as a manager is a challenger mindset, where you're believing in the other person. Like, I'm looking at you and I'm saying, you're an amazing podcast host.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. It's so natural to see it.
So well dressed.
Inspiring with the jacket. But
I'll pay you later.
Right. Well, it's very classic for a manager to sort of say, like, you can't fix stupid. I work with people who just can't step up, and they just sort of blame the other person for that. But as a challenger, as someone, what Roy Williams was doing in that room was not being nice to everybody. He was saying, we are going to win a national championship, and each of you, I can see exactly what you need to do. And he described to each of those people in the room, it was like they were the only person in the room, and you could just see him stand up straighter. They were ready to win. And that challenge is what a manager can provide when they trust you and when you're listening to them, when you're taking feedback, and then you're giving it that sense of, hey, you can accomplish more than you realize. And that's what leads to that's what coaching, giving feedback like a coach as a challenger really provides. And then of course, coaching and developing them on the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like that. I have run into some really stupid employees before.
Okay. All right.
well, this is...
You're the only one.
I'm not going to go into specifics about this person, but the level of stupid was, you'd say like, do I take this over to this person or that person? You're like, that person. You're like, great. Do I take it to this person or that person? You're like, yeah, what I just said, this person. Like, okay, write it down. Okay, am I taking it to this person or this person? It's like this weird loop that you just never get out of ever. So I'm not saying there could not possibly be a way to manage that person effectively, but what would a manager do? I mean, occasionally you are going to run across,
absolutely,
people are on drugs, or people just, can't get out of bed ever. I had an insanely high performing, awesome employee. Awesome. Like one of the best, most smartest hackers I've ever run across. It could break into anything, right? Just naturally talented, plus just tons of wisdom about how to do it. Couldn't get him to show up to work. Like not ever. Like for any reason. Just would not show up. I'm like, dude, we got things to do. He's like, okay. And just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how, now he's working at, he's working at like an Applebee's or something. Like that is his job now.
Yeah.
I think that there is a way. I think it's a bell curve, right? I think the vast majority of people are in the middle of that bell curve.
Yeah.
And there's a couple, and I can't point to many of them that I've worked with, but there's a couple that are way on the edge down there. And I don't know how they got there. I don't know what's causing the problem, but they're on the fringe.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, we're not talking about them.
No, we're not talking about them. Part of the high performance team thing is it does require the whole team to be participating. And again, that first choose your mindset, there's a sort of a shared commitment. Is the commitment there? And when I'm hearing guys not showing up, the commitment is what's not there. If you're not meeting someone with the same commitment and the same onus of responsibility that we're trying to create as the team, it's going to show up pretty fast.
Right.
So it does require that. It's cooperation.
It's all right to riff people, it sounds like.
Look, that's all part of what's difficult about being a leader is you can have all the tools in the world, and you also have to cultivate that team. And sometimes people just don't fit on the team, and it's painful. That's
all right.
painful.
I'm glad you guys are a realist about this, because a lot of people are like, no, it's the manager. The manager should have been, I don't know how. I mean, maybe I am just not a good enough leader, but I really don't know how. I'm not looking at this person as like a high potential future employee. It's just, won't get out of bed ever. Like not ever. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, it's hard to turn a pussycat into a tiger,
right.
You want to have people who have a drive, who have the same values as you, who want to be a part of something really difficult and challenging and that makes a difference, and get excited about that. And when you have those, then it's like, then how do you coach them and shape them into a team that can play well together, right? And
well, great. How do I look at a lineup of people and go, that's one of those people who's got that level of grit and desire to make it happen? Like, is there a way to weed out the lesser performers before they even get in the room? Or
you probably want to start, first of all, defining like what are the values and principles of your organization, and then really assess hard for values and for the principles. Like, do they have this? And then also look at past performance, right? And see sort of what have they done that demonstrate those values and principles, because skills can be taught, but values are harder to teach, right? You're gonna waste a lot of time, like this individual that didn't have drive. Like, good luck, getting him to have drive, right? So that's where we usually start, is really defining those core values and core principles, and then really interviewing for that. And also a work test is another good example.
What does that mean?
A work test is something where you basically give them something similar to what they're going to be doing and see how they do. There's one of our CEOs it's a large tech company, and he said it's amazing to see companies, programmers that come from these large companies that have these incredible educations, and they can't complete a programming test. And then he's had other people who don't have a college degree, who interview terribly, who've aced the test, who are awkward socially, but they come in, and so that's an example. It right away shows them some data about how they've done, right?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, skipping past the core values for a second, I do want to spend some time on that because I think it's interesting. But like, let's say you inherit a bad team or inherit a team. Some of them good, some of them terrible. Like, what's that process like from your perspective? Like, how do you diagnose that situation?
So
super common situation.
Absolutely, and I think I'll say we inherit a team, and there are various levels of performance on that team, and there are various reasons for the various levels of performance on that team.
Absolutely,
there's probably a dysfunction in the team somewhere that was inherited potentially from the culture that the last manager established.
Why would you be there otherwise?
Why would you be there?
Right.
So any new manager, and I think if you're inheriting a great team or a difficult team, you're still walking into a whole set of expectations, beliefs about what things should and shouldn't be. It's a culture clash for you, because even if you were on the team as a high performer and you've been elevated into manager, your whole life just changed. You are now in a new world. It's a new culture. It's a new team culture that you've inherited. And instead of relating to it as it's bad, it's fucked up, it's what I need to learn is what's going well and what's in the way. And I need to have listening tours with every single person on this team so that before I start managing, I know that I get what are those values? What are the operating principles of this team that are both stated and unstated? What are people's strengths? What are people's complaints? What are people's fears about what's going on? And then look at it as I'm creating a new team culture. Then you establish that team culture with the right tools and practices that come from a certain book called Be a Better Team by Friday. And then you're applying it one practice at a time, and you're building a new team culture with the practices that we provided you. And this has worked. I've talked to managers who are new managers. One guy was a new manager at Microsoft. I gave him the book. He said, "Thank you. I had no previous habits here. I read the book and I've been applying it." That he's a new manager. He's one of the most brilliant coders that I've ever met in my life. First time manager, and he's reading the book and he's applying it. And instead of relating to it as all these people are bad, sometimes all these people have had bad experiences.
Yeah.
And so,
or they're demotivated.
Absolutely.
Or they're not getting paid what they should because their previous person never saw what they were actually doing, or sometimes they switched teams and they were doing something really interesting and now they're doing something they don't want to do, and there's a lot of weird things happen.
Yeah, a great example of a challenger is the David Goggins story. Imagine you're familiar with him. And he basically was incredibly overweight, and he had someone at the SEALs office who basically said, like, "Hey, this is what you have to do. You have to lose this much weight. You have to be able to do. Here's the test." And challenged him to do it, and saw something in him, and just was speaking to that part of him. And then you had this totally mediocre, below average, very below average performer become one of the most extraordinary top performing people, in the world right now. Mm-hmm. But something was in the way, right? And for him, there wasn't a mission, there wasn't belief in him, there wasn't an opportunity.
Okay. Are there indicators, maybe it's psychological, indicators of whether someone's going to end up being a high performer or a low performer? I mean, I know you have the test, but is there...
golden question.
Is there something where you could be like, you're saying these magical words, you're looking me in the eye when we talk, you're showing up on time. Like, what are the clues I might use? I
think that I know you said we'd get back to the values. You cannot underestimate how clear are your values to you and shared understanding when you're working with a hiring team. Mm. How clear are you about the operating principles of your team that are getting transferred over? How clear are you about the accountability to the job and to the description to the actual job and what you're actually expecting? And then you do your personality assessments. Does it match what you need? You got multiple stakeholders interviewing. How do people feel? And then it is absolutely the case that once you get that person on board, then that's the roller coaster of leadership. And, the saying is hire slowly, fire fast.
Good luck.
And, if you can do that.
A lot of places overseas where you just can't.
Absolutely. And I wonder about that. It's a very different environment. And fire as a last resort as well. Making sure that you're actually doing these other things, putting the effort of development into that person, actually practicing what you preach. Because also the world of management is just, you can have all the tools in the world, but it's in case by case scenario. There are different relationships that we're working on and many, many people. And sometimes it doesn't work in that particular team environment.
Okay. Well, we danced around it. What are some examples of good, like very concise, clear core values or job description, role, accountability, line items I might put in a rec that might kind of select for the right kind of person?
The author Pat Lencioni, amazing business writer, wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, recommends 3 that seems to be popular with people if you don't have any values of your own.
Sure.
Humble, hungry, and smart. And by smart, he means emotionally smart.
EQ.
Mm-hmm. And we have a colleague, and she uses that in all of her businesses. So she's started, 3 or 4 businesses, and every one of her business has the same values. She just uses those.
So interesting. That's pretty similar to how like special forces bring people in as well. Pretty close. Trustworthiness is another extraordinarily high on that list. Mm-hmm. Like I'd rather have someone perfectly trustworthy than someone who's just smart.
Yep. Or skilled, right?
Or skilled, correct.
Right. Yeah. They'll overselect that over a better sniper. They would rather have someone who has complete trust. And the trust is beyond just, I trust you to do this. It's, right, I trust you to be around my wife when I'm not around.
Sure.
That level of trust.
I remember I did some analysis. This is many years ago now, but I think it holds up. I asked a whole bunch of like very high level security executives that were talking about insider threats within their companies. I'm like, well, mostly you don't have to worry about it. Just we have the data. We know it doesn't really happen very often. However, there's a massive like ... there. We were at this Mexican restaurant, one case, I remember, and it was like maybe 100 people there or something. I'm like, okay, now let's say I put a briefcase down that had like $1 million in it, open it up so everyone could see, and showed it all around. I was really proud of it, whatever. And then I walked out of this Mexican restaurant. Do you think that would sit there? Do you think everyone would just like, oh, he's going to come back for it and whatever? Maybe. What if there were no cameras in there? Mm. What if no one felt they had any accountability whatsoever to whether that went missing or not? Finders keepers, 9/10 of the law kind of deal. How many people do you think would steal it? And they're like, oh, maybe 10% would do it. And there's, maybe 90%. I'm like, okay, well, how many people work at your company? They're like, whatever, 100,000 or something. I'm like, great. You just told me that somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 of your employees would rob you blind. You know what I mean? If they thought they could get away with it. And so the only thing really protecting you is the controls you put in place, which is pretty scary. I don't know if that's the right number, but it's not like orders of magnitude wrong, Mm. And so that's why I think, especially on teams that really have, very incredibly important job functions, not every team is the same, right? Some teams are just not that important compared to other teams. But it when you're on one of those teams, and you're like, the whole world will fall down if I don't do the right thing. Like pressing that button makes the company turn off. That one is make me millions of dollars. That one, everything works fine. Mm-hmm. You're on that team if you see those 3 buttons, right? Trust is it. I mean, I can basically train a monkey to press the right buttons, but I can't make sure the monkey won't press the wrong button just because it's selfish and wants more, dopamine or whatever.
Right. So I think for a lot of executive teams that we work with, and we're working with a lot of executive teams in very fast growth environments, so mid-market, growing from one level to the next level, often working in pretty high pressure situations where they've at one time been a startup, no longer a startup. They're working with a really kind of intense demand on the executive team. And so there has to be complete trust on that executive team. That's really where a lot of the breakdowns happen, because when there's a lack of trust at that level, you'll see the divides show up in the organization. So when the lack of trust is there between a COO and a CMO, you're going to see the divide between marketing and operations. The development team, the sales team, their executives, they don't trust each other. You're going to see that divide in the organization.
Nearly every sales and marketing teams hate each other.
And that's very common,
Nearly every one of them.
Totally. Sales is they're selling stuff we don't have. Why don't they sell what we already have? And sales is saying you're not developing fast enough.
Right.
That's the silo,
right.
And then you got the executives who run those departments saying the same thing in meetings over and over again. You don't understand.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. We go in and we break down the silos and we can dissolve conflict, and then we create alignment.
This is great. Walk me through what ends up happening. So you got a pissed off marketing executive and a pissed off sales executive, and now what happens?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, part of it is you need to start with the whole team, right?
Okay.
The entire executive team. And one of the first things...
Okay, not their underlings, just the executives.
You have to start
with the exec team.
Okay.
Yep.
Because the entire company kind of follows the head, And so, and they're modeling the behaviors that you want to see or don't want to see, right? So you have to create that healthy and aligned executive team first. But, first of all, it's actually having an honest conversation about what's actually the current state of the company, right? So what is the level of what is the level of trust or level 10 conversations, we call them, that you can have on this team? How honest can we be here, right? And you actually have them score and assess how honest are our conversations. On a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is, your best friend. You can tell anything no matter what. 1 is totally politically correct. You're not saying anything. And then you have them assess. And it's usually, like a 6 or a 7. And that correlates the results they're getting. A little better than mediocre. You're getting a D or a C basically, right? Mm-hmm. And so first naming it, and then asking everybody to, hey, we actually have to have the real conversations, and then creating a space where they actually can have those conversations. And you have to do that by creating trust. So we do an exercise called Getting Real, where we actually have people share personally and professionally sort of the 3 highs and 3 lows in their life. And it's a pretty intense exercise when you do it. People are uncomfortable. You have to actually have tissues around, even among,
Really?
Yes. And people share conversations they usually haven't shared with many people or if anyone in their life.
Do you give them time to prepare for this? They have to kind of wing it. Because
I
wonder what the delta would be.
Well, it's funny, give them a little time to prepare, but if you have too much time to prepare, people just censor because they're nervous. Uh-huh. The key is you have to have the first person who goes, ideally it's the CEO, you have to ask them to go deep and be vulnerable.
So everyone's having time to think about their own story.
Well, we usually, the way it works is you got a little time beforehand. You write down your notes. You draw a line on a piece of paper. Yeah. This is a practice in the book. And draw a line on a piece of paper, and then you do the highs above and the lows below the timeline. So you get a chance to reflect. And it's always an invitation, only as much as you'd like to share. Right. This is never you got to open up. It's really just an opportunity to build what's called vulnerability-based trust. Another Pat Lencioni term, but just the Navy SEALs. The Culture Code is a book by a guy named Daniel Coyle. He studied the Navy SEALs, and that was what they were saying, was that it was the vulnerability of basically having each other's lives in each other's hands is why they're such a high functioning, such a close group, is that vulnerability based trust. They're all vulnerable together and they're really working to support each other. Well, you can create that, not at a Navy SEALs level, but in an executive team, you have this kind of high heat conversation. Well, you open the door for future high heat conversations. And that's powerful. Mm-hmm. And that's what's missing. It's the trust isn't there. I remember one time we walked into a executive offsite, and there's, it's in a beautiful location, and we walk in, and everybody's saying, oh yeah, the retreat's going good. It's going good. Meanwhile, I know there's one of the executives on that team that has basically been talked about in every one of the interviews, and the elephant in the room has not really been addressed, that he's got communication breakdowns with everybody on the team. So what we did in that situation was we taught the skill of listening to understand to everyone on the team, and we just practiced it. Just practice repeating back. Did I get that right? Did I get that right? He sat down with 2 people that afternoon, and he came back after he'd done this exercise where they shared about themselves one-on-one. They listened to each other, and they built relationship, and he had to practice actually not saying what he thinks, but listening and repeating back what he heard. And he was doing that. And by the end of it, he said, that was so hard to do. I was having such a hard time listening. I realized I must be really hard to understand because I'm not a clear communicator. And it just snapped him open. And in that moment, he became a different executive. And literally in that moment, he became a different executive. They went on a year later. They sold the company. He was still with the company. He was thriving. They did it really well. It was a very successful exit. And that's how it works. It's really in building trust by listening to each other. That's how you do it. And I don't think there's any other way to dissolve any conflicts. There's nothing besides listening to understand. And I'll stand about that one. You have to understand each other to be able to dissolve the conflict.
Have you considered violence? That also seems to work.
Does not dissolve the conflict. Dissolving the conflict means it goes away. God, that stuff doesn't make it go away.
Well, that's pretty cool. So, what's sort of the post-mortem after you sit them down and do this? Do they write their experiences? Do they just anecdotally tell you? Or do you have some sort of like barometer for like, you said it's a 7 before, what is it now? Or like, how are you measuring this?
I mean, first of all, you can notice it right away, right? So like we were working with a team who was, an acquisition had just happened. They were out to dinner. So one company had acquired the other, and they were sitting in different space. One team was sitting, one company was sitting here, one company was sitting here. At the meetings, the body language was like this. The conversation was very politically correct and very much about like, what's in it for me, and a lot of politicking and positioning, right? And at the end of the 2 days, where they're practicing these tools, you couldn't tell who was from what company. You couldn't tell who was from one function or the other. They were all operating as just like if you walked in the room, just as one unit. So you'll literally see it in terms of and in terms of and also you'll feel it a little bit in the room. There's laughter. There's like it doesn't feel stuck, right? There's joy present. But some of the things that you start happening is financial performance improves, innovation speeds up. Silos go away. Net promoter score goes up. How likely are you to recommend this company to a friend or colleague, right? When you ask that question.
That's a good one. Let me tell you how that works. So one time we were navigating a merger and acquisition, and we walked into a room, and it was similar to what Dave was talking about. It's just a very different experience because when you walk into the room when there's no low trust, that crossed arm thing, that's what you see. So you see people leaning back. They're in the room, and I'm standing in front of this room of two merged companies that have been working together for 2 years, but every single person in the room could say who worked for the old company, 2 years later, because that's what happens when you bring people together and you don't do the integration work. So I'm standing in front of that room. Their arms are crossed. They're looking at each other like they don't want to talk. They're looking at me like they don't want me to be there because I'm saying we're going to have an open and honest conversation. But by the end of that day, these conflicts had started to dissolve. 9 months later, when we surveyed the ENPS score, Employee Net Promoter Score, how likely are you recommend to work for this company? It had gone up 40 points, which is at the highest in their company. That was in 9 to 10 months because we did this kind of work and we did some sustaining work inside of it. But this is what made it happen. And that's how you measure it, is ultimately the cultural scores go up and revenue is going up. Usually goals are getting hit much faster.
Right.
Yeah. So we worked with a company. They were, there was conflict between two executive team members. CEO was thinking about bringing us in, and then all of a sudden a conflict blew up between two people. And it was marketing and development. Actually, that was and we started working with them, and basically they went from $10 million struggling startup, like maybe they'd get $10 million. That was their valuation. They went to 1.3 billion, became a global leader, went through, 15 plus acquisitions, and were purchased by Vista, which is like the Harvard equity of,
know them well.
We worked with them through that life cycle.
Interesting. So M&A is kind of an interesting topic. Maybe spend a minute on that. There's so many things that can go wrong culture-wise. Like just in the early stages, like when you're just sort of courting and just trying to figure out, whether you want to go on a date or not. And then, the lawyers get involved, and then it's just like all this weird backstabbing, and just it's like you're no longer dating. Now you're like negotiating the prenup already. And it's like, ugh, I thought we were romantic. I thought we were having a good time here, and then it's just, it gets all business and no fun whatsoever. And now it's a lot of like distrust, and it's like built into the contract, not just like performance objectives. Like if you get sued, we get a huge clawback. It's like, well, how do I know for a fact that is or isn't going to happen? Like you're already putting me at arm's length, and so there's all this kind of buildup and true distrust across both organizations, and it just kind of continues. Like, well, what are you going to do when you come in? You're going to like try to change a bunch of stuff, or vice versa, So like, first of all, what part of that are you guys jumping into? Is it always after, or do you get to help through the entire process? And then like, what are some of the pitfalls you guys are seeing?
Yeah, well, it's better to come in before there's an issue, right? So the example that I gave of that companies the acquisition had just happened. We were in that first meeting with the executive team, and we came in with the executive team, and then worked with all of their teams, the combined teams, introducing them to these practices so that they could perform at high levels. We've also come in afterwards where there's already an issue, there's already silos, and you have to kind of undo some things. The piece about acquisitions is when the private equity companies and usually are looking at it from a systems perspective. They're looking at like, okay, well, we have a financial system, they have a financial system, we can save money, we'll cut this one. Okay, well, we are looking at redundancies of people, and they're looking at the company like a spreadsheet. So the observable things on the outside. What they're not thinking about is the attitude and culture. So how do you get people to want to be a part of the new thing? How do you get them to enrolled in the new mission? How do you make sure you understand what their concerns and fears are, and what they want to contribute, and so that they can contribute that in the table? So we work with the cultural part of it, the cultural integration, to make sure, because Peter Drucker has this expression. He says culture eats strategy for breakfast, and we say culture eats M&A for breakfast, because the first thing that happens after M&A is the best people leave.
Yeah, I was about to say the exact same thing.
Right?
I was literally about to say that.
It's predictable, because they're getting recruited all the time, right? The best people, everyone wants them, right? And as soon as an acquisition happens, all of a sudden they're out. Right. And that's
they should leave. I mean, they're kind of mistreated in this M&A process. It's like, oh, we'll document everything for me because we think you're going to leave. It's like, oh my God, that's like 6 months of work, and it's all busy work, and I'm not doing the cool thing anymore. And we had all these plans, like, nope, all that's on hold, and it's awful. It's really bad.
And you got to be thinking about, from the perspective of the M&A deal, there's the deal, and then there's the strategy to execute. And I think a lot of times it gets a lot of focus on the deal, and we really try to be working at the strategic level before they've done the integration, so that we're really thinking about how do you unroll a cultural development strategy that actually does do the integration and thinks about this stuff, because that's what is going to lead your investment to succeed, is if you're actually addressing it this way. It's why Harvard Business Review says 70 to 90% of M&A fails to produce their intended results, and Deloitte's saying it's because it's the people issues. You have to be able to look at this. I think it's just so hard to do the integration. That's why there's not a lot of focus on it, and that's really where we're very good, is how do you strategize the unrolling of this from a cultural perspective, so that you do tap into a shared sense of understanding, and it becomes a very adaptive challenge. The people in the old company are going to have to learn how to work differently too. You got one company coming in, there can't be the dominant company that just tries to absorb it. That doesn't work. And how do you actually start to build the conversations that develop the new relationships, that develop the new opportunities, that develop the new actions, that develop the new results? And that's what we do, is help them have those kinds of conversations that build the new teams. And so it's very different.
All right. Well, let's talk about the case for Blue Case.
All right.
So how do people get in touch with you in the first place? Like, how do they just find the website, or is this mostly word of mouth? Like, how do you kind of get your clients typically?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of referrals, come in, because we've had a really good track record. We've, helped 4 companies cross the $1 billion threshold. And so many of our clients, after they kick off with us, are clients for life, and they'll oftentimes refer us, or when they start their next company, then come back. So that's one way. But people, the way they get in touch with us is, through our website, through LinkedIn. Sometimes they read the book. That's how they come in.
And when they do that, are they have a problem in mind? They're like, I've got this nagging suspicion I'm not a very good leader, or they're like, I'm having conflicts with this other team. Like, it's
usually like these inflection points. Like, first of all, like there could, there's a new executive on the executive team, right? And they want to make sure the executive team is gelling and performing at high levels. The company just got an infusion of capital, and they have really aggressive goals, and they want to make sure that they can be performing at high levels. There's a acquisition coming up, or an acquisition that just happened, and they want to address the cultural integration part. The CEOs oftentimes have a sense that there is more. They have a mission of something that they want to achieve, and what's happening is they're noticing like the company's gotten soft in the middle. We've kind of drifted towards mediocrity. I don't know what the problem is, but like we should be crushing it, and we're making money. But why aren't we here? Why do things take so long? How come there's conflict? How come our culture is starting to get weaker? And they've just
how are they measure? Is it just instinctual, or are they
everything? I mean, like again, they're making money, like they're growing, but they should be going like this, right? Like, but they're growing like this. Things take long. There's conflict. Things are being thrown over to the fence to the executives, and the executives are getting piled up with work. They don't see the level of leadership that they want in the rest of the company. So these are some of the signs.
A lot of times when you find you're doing a lot of assessments, but you're not really sure what to do with the information, that's also a time when it's very important, because what we really see, I can't tell you how many times they'll say, well, a lot of the highest scores of where we got to work is on communication. We've got communication challenges. And
isn't that everybody though?
Exactly. And that's what every CEO says. Well, isn't that everybody?
Uh-huh.
And what we say is, actually, we can do something about that. Uh-huh. We can make this better. And it's not just how people talk. It's really how the organization works collectively together and collaboratively. And that starts with the executive team. And then we branch it out into the directors and managers, and we create cross-functional collaboration across the company. And those communication scores on the assessments, they improve. Mm-hmm. Things do improve. We have data to support.
So what does that mean though? Like, I'm sorry.
Well, here's an example, right? So typically, like you can test levels of engagement, right? And when they assess companies globally, basically 70% of the workforce is not engaged. So think about that from a dollar perspective.
And when they say not engaged, do they mean they show up to their job but they're not really giving a shit about the job, or do they mean like quiet quitting, or what exactly does that mean?
This is based on Gallup's data, where they're interviewing people, and they distinguish it as two different types of disengagement. There's engaged, which is fully absorbed in their job, not looking around, and then there's disengaged, which is something is offline, and they're not fully describing engagement. They're not reporting that on the assessment. Mm-hmm. And then there's actively disengaged. An actively disengaged person is the person who's out complaining, who's kind of sabotaging efforts, who's resisting, who's really
toxic.
Kind of what sometimes called toxic, and that's a lower percentage than the majority of the disengagement is just low-level disengagement.
Half-ass. Just half-ass. Dudes, they don't want to get fired, but they're not. They're phoning it in. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you think about that from your dollars, that this is probably one of your largest costs in your entire company is, and you have 70% of those dollars you're basically throwing down the drain. Because do you really want someone who's half-ass on your team? I mean, it's a terrible use of resources, and they're disengaged oftentimes because of the way that the leaders are leading. I'm going to ask you a question, since you guys do this professionally. Once upon a time, I worked for this company. I did not like this job at all. Yeah. It was probably top 2 or 3 least favorite jobs I've had in my life. Way up there. I've had a lot of jobs. And and I really wanted it to work. I was trying. It was they were paying me well. It was a cool idea, I thought. So I went in very positively. Very quickly, I realized there was just a lot of bureaucracy internally. It was very difficult to get things done. And I was just like, full on brakes. And I had this kind of epiphany one day. I'm like, it seems like every time I send an email,
things get worse. Not better, but worse. I'm like, this is very odd, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. Like things just like people spin up, they get all excited about what I wrote, and then it causes all these delays. I'm like, it really shouldn't have caused any delay. It shouldn't have any effect whatsoever. It's kind of an off the cuff comment, but it always derailed things. So as an experiment, I chose some week, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to respond to any emails at all unless they say emergency, like flagged as emergency or something, just to see what happens. And really nothing happened. A couple people came into my office, say, hey, did you see that email? Which I had, because I was paying attention. I just wasn't responding. And I'm like, oh, no, I didn't see it. What happened? And they'd explain the one thing I needed to know. And I'm like, oh, here's the thing that you should do. I'm like, okay, great. And they leave. I'm like, oh, that's weird. It worked really well. Like everything got like settled. It kind of relaxed a little bit. So then I stopped responding to the emergencies too, to see what happened. Right. I did that for a couple of weeks, and I stopped doing the emergencies. And again, a couple of people would come to my office like, oh, did you see that horrible thing that's happening? I'm like, oh, you should do this. Like, okay, great. And they leave. I maybe cut my meetings down to like 2 meetings a week, maybe 3 meetings a week, and 0 email and like 2 phone calls or something. That was all of the work I put in as an experiment to see what happened. And the company got very efficient. Things were working really well. How do you diagnose that situation? What do I do? Well, should I have gotten more engaged with that? I mean, is that the diagnosis? You see my problem? Like my engagement was actually the problem somehow. We have no idea what the situation was. I would probably have done like 3 interviews by now before we're really assessing your situation. So. But like, I mean, I can tell you what I can tell you. I mean, there was an executive team who was, marching orders and coming down like, this is what needs to happen or whatever, not with a whole lot of input from the team. So they just kind of just did grunt work or whatever. I was sort of middle management. So I was kind of just taking orders and trying to piecemeal it out to the team, who was, I would say half of them were totally underqualified to do it. And the other ones were wildly overqualified. They just didn't know it. They were just too new to understand how good they actually were, like insanely hyper, like some of them gone on to do amazing things, like work for huge funds and stuff. I had one of them on the podcast, as a matter of fact. So it was a mixed bag, right? Some were awesome, some were terrible. I wanted to fire them instantly if I could have, but there was bureaucracy. I just know that every time I sent an email, the team would explode. It was like I might as well have chucked a grenade in the middle of the office. Like, it was amazing. It was so bad. Like it was like 2 days of aftermath for every email that I'd send. Like, why is this every time? It's such a big deal.
So how I would, if we were in a coaching dynamic right now, and if I was your coach,
this was years ago, so don't worry.
Okay. whole different, kind of style. If I was coaching you, I'd be asking you questions, but the first thing that I'd have you do is actually go and do listening tours with each of these people. And then you come back and you bring me the composite results of what you've been learning. And typically what you'll start to notice is you have to do it more than one time, because you go out and you do a listening tour with some folks and they're saying, here's what you're doing great. This is what's great about you as a leader. And they're giving you, and that's the kind of listening tour you're doing. You're going and asking about yourself, how I'm doing as a leader. What would be even better for me to do? What advice do you have for me? And what would be possible for us if we were having a high level of success together? And I'd have you just go do that with every single person on your team. And what would happen is, the people who you got the rapport with would give you a lot more information. The people who feel less trust, you'd have to go out and do it again and just build that, hey, I show that I take the feedback on and I apply it. And that's how we would learn in your situation what's really going on. And I was working one time with a guy who was extremely successful. He was a partner in a financial firm. Very, very good at his job, doing his task. He's a partner. Had a lot. He was brilliant at the game that they were playing, at their business. And I went and did interviews with many of his direct reports, and I would be taking notes, and they would be just talking about how hard it was to work for him, but they could never say this. We could never say this. And I go back to him with the data, and he's like, I don't know. I didn't realize that. I had no idea they thought that about me. I had none. And so I had him do this. And he went out and did listening tours with the folks. And he was saying like, if they just had better employees, it'd be better. He had that mentality at first. Sure. Yeah. But then he's going out and he's doing it. And he has his right-hand man he's doing with it now every 2 weeks. And it's got to build the rapport of this this style of leadership. And as he's getting the feedback, we're starting to work together to think that there are issues, but it's blind spots. We all got blind spots, and teams have blind spots. And so how do we unearth them and start to create practical plans of, managing each person differently?
Mm-hmm. I would say in general, not that it matters to anybody, but my management style has always been a little Socratic method.
Yeah.
Where not everybody likes Socratic method.
Right. Yes.
Really,
it's true.
It is not. It rubs people the wrong way if they're not used to it. But the extreme high performers often just love it because I don't really care who's right. I just want the right answer, and so I'll beat them up on their ideas, and I expect them to beat me up back. And whoever wins, great. Let's go. That's the idea. Let's do it. So heavy in the data-driven stuff, and I just I don't admonish them for coming with bad ideas unless I know that they have put zero effort into that idea. Come on, like go do some work and come back and we'll talk about a better idea, or your idea will have some merit based on some data it's a gut check kind of thing. Some people really, I don't like it. They assume that I'm always out to make them look like idiots or something. Well, if you give me a bad idea, I am. But if you give me great ideas, then you're going to go very far very quickly. I remember I mentioned these guys a couple times on the podcast before, but I had two guys, and both of them I would say were senior developers, very high level or whatever. But they were not the kind of developers I needed. Like I needed somebody who was like their senior. You know what I mean? Like they're already very high, but I needed someone who understood a nuance of programming that's very rare. And so they came in and I'd give them, here's the things I need you to do it in this very specific way. And I think they thought I was talking down to them, but I was actually just giving them the formula to do the job correctly. So they pocket veto me because they're senior developers and, I know how to do it, whatever, and then it would be broken and I'd have to go and I'm like, see, this is specifically why I told you to do this very, thing. And I documented it all and I explained why I needed it. You chose not to read what I wrote. And now we have to unwind this code. Now I need you to go back and reread what I wrote. And here's all these things I need you to go read so that you understand why I need you to learn these things. So it was a rough lesson on these guys, like very rough. And they were contractors. So they kind of didn't have much say in this, right? Like, if I don't like you, you're out. They are the best developers I've ever met now. Mm-hmm. They actually stood up and they're like, you know what? He's right. There's these deep nuances of these things we weren't aware of. And now I would stack them up against anybody. They're incredible.
It sounds like you're standing in that challenger role. That's really what that is.
I think maybe.
That to me is what I hear in that. That's probably your strength, and you were challenging them and they stood up and met the challenge and you kind of helped them catapult into that next level.
So is that the magic formula, or is it, because I know a lot of people, okay, backing up. I think that there's the wartime CEO and there's the peacetime CEO as an example, but you can have executives of the same ilk. Wartime is like challenger, like I need this now, like we don't have time to dilly-dally on this thing. Like I realize it'd be nice to go have like an ice cream sundae Fridays or whatever, the team, but there is no time for that. We're at war because XYZ company just came out with a killer product and we're in a fight for our lives kind of deal. And they go in and they hit hard and people just hate it because they don't like being under that kind of pressure, or they thrive because they finally feel some purpose. Or there's the peacetime CEO where it's like, well, we're all at peace here and things are going well and we're growing at our 15% per year or whatever. And we've been around for 20 years and, there's no reason to believe we're not going to continue to grow and the market's happy with us. And so ice cream Sunday, social on Fridays or whatever. And let's get together and get to know each other. And what are you guys doing? And how's your family life like or whatever? The kind of person who thrives in getting things done quickly hates that environment. Yeah. They just cannot survive. they're the ones who are very likely to leave like in a moment's notice. Like, nope, not for me. Whereas the people who prefer a more relaxed environment are going to hate that wartime CEO. So I don't know which one is the better of the two if I had to choose one, because you kind of only get one persona. You really only get to push one sort of ethic out at a time anyway. So what do you think?
I think there's an in-between.
Okay.
That's really where you want to be. I think remember that how I was talking about peak performance psychology, there's the healthy level of stress and the healthy level of ease. That's where you get peak performance. It's right in between. And it's just like in sports. If a sports team has been overstressed, they're going to start losing games. If they've been overcoached, they're going to start losing games. It's the same here. And you see burnout happen in those cultures. You should not be in wartime for more than a short period of time. I mean, that's not how that works. It's really, do you have unused creativity, intelligence, innovation latent in your organization because of your management structures? And what do you need to do? Do you need to intensify and say, we need to get better at execution? We need to get really clear, putting everything into plans, everything into display. We're not getting things done. So we got to turn up the heat in the execution department.
Okay, so there are definitely teams inside companies that are at war all the time. And it's not necessarily a failure of the technology. It's just that they're literally stopping bad guys at the door. You know what I mean? They're
right.
It's a literal war. Yeah. In some cases, like people are getting hurt kind of war, right? Or real serious issues. So for them, what do you do? Do you cycle them out and you say like you can only be in this role for a certain amount of time, so that you avoid this burnout? I think so that you get some respite. Like what's the psychology there, for instance?
Yeah, I think part of it is you need to be able to have practices so that you're not you need to be able, even in that environment, to be able to be relaxed, to be able to be, for example, the Navy SEALs are trained to breathe and to stay very calm in those situations, because if they get into an overstress state, they're not going to be able to perform well. Like they'll make poor decisions, because you go into the, as you get stressed, neuroscience you basically go into the stupidest part of your brain. You're good at running away and you're good at fighting, right? But you're not
freezing.
good at freezing. But you're not good at problem solving. You're not good at creative thinking. In fact, your vision actually narrows, right? You can't actually see the whole horizon. Well, that's not great for decision making if you actually have something where it requires something beyond just brute strength, right? Like you're not just fighting someone or something. So how do you relax yourself and make sure that you're coming from your cerebral cortex, your most creative part of your brain? How do you make sure that as you're leading, you are also taking care of your team, that people feel cared about, right? Because like if I'm just driving and it's just about like get this done and people don't feel cared about, that's very different than if I'm saying, hey, this is really important. I know the sacrifice you're making. I know it's important to you. Let's find a way to have each other's back and thank you. And, let's take care of each other. That's a very different way of leading. So kind of what Justin's talking about is kind of that stress, right? So you do want some stress that's helpful for performance. Like if the Olympics didn't have timing, like if there's no time and you didn't keep score, people wouldn't perform well. Like every one of those athletes, they're jazzed up, right? And they're a little bit stressed. But if they were overly stressed, they would make poor mistakes. And they've trained to actually be relaxed and be smooth in those situations. It's the same thing.
Interesting. Or they quit.
Right. I mean, we're talking about accelerating teams, and how do you really get both, that mix of both?
I was at a large, very large aerospace organization that you would know.
Yes.
And the amount and the people were unbelievably overeducated. They had their PhDs in aerospace and MBAs and attorneys, and loved working there. I mean, this was like their dream job as a kid. And the level of the level of stress was so high, the level of workload was so high that people were like having heart attacks at work. They were having all these stress related disorders because they were just under so much stress that even though physically they were safe, like it didn't require a thing that would injure them, heart attacks and all types of incidents of stress-related diseases was incredibly high. It wasn't actually a healthy place to work. And that's kind of the example of what you have when you have that, just that wartime all the time. It wasn't because they weren't brilliant. It wasn't because they weren't motivated. They loved the purpose. It was just because they were too far on that scale of intensity and pushing. And
I've noticed, myself included, if you do PTSD, like those online tests, there's a whole bunch of them. There's some that are pretty good. Some are terrible. Like a lot of us are off the charts from doing this type of work, like off the charts. It's like we've been in a war zone or something for 20 months or something, and we've never left our desk. And I think some of that is, there's death threats and there's inbound potential real danger as opposed to theoretical danger. But then there's also a lot of theoretical danger, like, oh, well, what if I get hacked back? Or what if, they figure out who I am as I'm doing this covert operation or whatever. So I think there's 3 groups of people that are kind of similar, and they all got very different jobs. One are spies. One are like people in the mafia. And the other are people in security. They all have a very similar problem. Can't really talk about what they do to anybody. They have to have a very high level of personal operational security, so they can't really talk to anybody. It's not like you can go talk to your therapist about what you did that day, and they're not really allowed to talk to even each other because of, again, operational security, like NDAs and things that can leak out or whatever. So they're all siloed on an island. They're all just sort of kind of dealing with everything by themselves. I don't think that's healthy.
Probably not. I am just rewatching Sopranos season 1, and I gotta say, it is all about what you're talking about, of him seeing a therapist and he's not supposed to be seeing a therapist. So I'm learning a lot about that from watching it. But
I'm sure there's other groups that are kind of similar, maybe not as drastic as what I just described, but they're like I can't really talk about what I'm doing because it's under NDAs, and it's super important to the company. I'm not allowed to telegraph outside my team what's happening, and they're stuck.
I think the people that we work that experience that when we're working in, again, these fast growth mid market. So innovation is very key. I mean, they're not doing security. They're doing really how do we kind of create new processes.
But still, I mean, they have some level of security. They don't want this intellectual property leaving.
The CEO is the one who's most isolated and most alone and can't talk to anybody about it. And that's why the CEO needs a coach, because that job, everything that you say is taken differently than anyone else in the company. And there's nobody that you can talk to. So I've worked with CEOs who are talking about both their divorce and the crisis that's going on their team with me. I'm working with CEOs who talks about the loss of a close family member and the partner dynamic that they're having, because there's no one else that they can talk to about these things. Because as soon as you start talking about it with people in your team, you are creating more of the problem.
Yeah, of course.
And so
you're sending that email in my case.
Yeah.
It's like a bomb going off.
It's really that you are trying to figure out, how do I do things differently with a team that you can never fully be, you're in the hot seat. You're the only one in the hot seat. You're accountable to the board. You're accountable to your team and the organization, and nobody else has that unique role. And that's why I think the CEO job is often misunderstood, and why it is so fundamental to the company.
Okay, I'd like to dig in this one. I've been a CEO before. I know how it's a terrible job. It really is really, really awful job. Actually, I feel bad for a lot of people. Don't realize it until they're kind of far along, and then they're sort of stuck, and unwinding that position it's difficult, and sometimes they're really required to run the company. They're sort of the face of the company, and stepping back is almost impossible, at least, from their perspective. So let's talk about the loneliness. Like, what kind of tools do you give them to, I don't know, be vulnerable enough to talk about all of those different aspects of their life?
Well, I was meeting with the CEO back in, I think it was November, year ago, November. And he's a CEO who he's kind of like a biotech darling. Like, he's kind of, like Elon, he's deciding, should I be the Elon Musk of biotech, or should I focus on my family?
Isn't that the Theranos woman? I don't.
No, you don't want to be that. That's not. No. Legitimate. Actually has technologies that actually do what they say.
I see.
I can assure you.
That's where I got you.
No, but so he's asking that question, and I can't tell him that answer. Nobody can tell you that answer. He can't go talk to his team about his divides. What we do is you sit down and I say, what do you love about the job? Why do you love this? What is most important to you about the job? And then from those answers, I start to hear a vision, and I repeat back the vision that I hear, and I say, it sounds like what you want to do is that you want to make an impact that changes the DNA of our world so that we're all healthier and we're all better, and you care about this on a global level and you want it to reach people. And he says, yeah, that's true. And it reaches that spot.
So you should probably not go public then. Oof.
Well, it's
once you go public, now you're profit driven and you just gotta hit that hamster wheel.
Well, again, we're working with, this is an innovation lab. So, they're focused on what are the cutting edge technologies that will radically shift our relationship with life. And how do we do it so that we really are focused on benefiting people? And to him, that was very important. And that's what we call it, the fundamental why. So it's one of the chapters in our book is, or one of the sections in our book is knowing a personal fundamental why. And everyone has something that drives them. Bigger than themselves, bigger than their mind, but that's had them in that CEO role in the first place. You are right. It is a hard job. Why would anyone just do it if they weren't driven by a mission bigger than themselves?
I've conned my buddy to be the CEO of my company. So I don't have to do it.
Well done.
Yeah. Hopefully he can find that.
Oh, he's great.
So that's what drives. That's what I think drives a CEO and should drive a CEO. And if they're out of touch with that, that's what we're looking to reconnect with that. And there's many other things that we would be doing, but to me, that's first and foremost and most important.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the book now, because we've kind of danced around it quite a bit. What was the impetus to write this all down? Is this a marketing thing, or is this you really want this information out there? What was the goal there?
Well, David and I have been working together for 8+ years. We did this work before working together. Mm-hmm. This is something that we've really found a way to together make this impact in these companies that we're working with that we couldn't have done better on our own. And we came together to do that, and we started to have a lot of success. And for me personally, I see that when we're successful, also people's lives are getting better. And I think David's seen it too. But that's what's really most important for me is when the company starts thriving because they're applying our tools, their bottom lines are getting better, and people are describing and reporting things are better around here. It's like a breath of fresh air, or even coming onto call saying, you changed my life. To us, these skills are what the world needs. The world needs these skills. The only way to dissolve conflict is listening and understand the world needs these skills. It's not for us to just hold on to it. We want to get this out there. As many managers out there that we can, as many companies that are struggling as we can, just to have some of the tools that we've seen work so well
Is that your why? Is that what gets you up in the morning?
For me,
yeah, for both of you.
Yeah, we both have, I think a shared sense, but I think for me personally, it's really just that people are thriving in their lives. I mean, that's it. And I think it's a lot about what Blue Case is about, but it's that because of the work we do, people's lives are better. And I see it. So for me, that's a personal fundamental why. But
yeah. And for me, it's about ignition, right? Like when you see a bright light, when someone's ignited, it's contagious, right? And so part of like the way I relate to this is that we're throwing matches, and we're trying to ignite people and ignite organizations. And when you do, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary because to see that happen in an organization because it translates. If any real changes, it's consistent across work and outside of work, right? Like if you become a better leader, you're a better leader in your family, you're a better leader with your friends. If you're happier at work, you're happier outside of work. And so like how many people can we light up? Someone called me, got in touch with me we worked together 7 years ago, and she just said, you changed my life. I feel like you created a beacon. Like everything is different. We had a conversation. And from that conversation, the world changed. And what I'm doing is different. My happiness level is different. My fulfillment is different. Like, I'm on fire. I'm doing this for other people now, and so like that is so motivating, right? To know, to have people say I'm a better father. I'm happier. We had a CEO, who we worked with, and he sold this company. It was a medical device space and made a ton of money. And I sort of said, what was the best part? And he said, you improved my marriage. He said, I had a really good marriage, and my marriage got a lot better when you talked. We have this piece where we talked about...
Because of the communication style?
Yeah, we talked about styles. Yeah, we talked about different styles, and like how part of the way you work well with different people is to start noticing what your style is and what other people's styles are, and how you tilt and how you can communicate more effectively based on what style you are and what style someone else is. And when he recognized that with his wife, it improved his marriage. And so he was thanking me. He's like, that made the biggest difference. Not the money was great, all these things, but my life is just so much better. That's so rewarding when you do that.
You've helped us make my dream. You've helped me make my dreams come true. We've heard that from CEOs. Like, everything they could imagine that they wanted for the company happened during the course of working together.
Yeah, we were broken. We were broken, and you came in and you fixed us. I mean, that's not what we say, but that's what people have said. You came in 2 days, we were different. That's kind of why we talk about Be a Better Team by Friday. We want this all to be practical so you understand it and you can apply it immediately.
Very quickly.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because, it's in the name. But I actually took one of the things out of curiosity, the giving the feedback specifically. I'm like, I don't know that I'm great at giving feedback, so I will do this technique instead. And so I did exactly what you guys decided to do, which was I was sort of framing it up like, here's the things you're doing well. I'm really proud of you for XYZ. Are you open to feedback? And then I slowly gave them the pretty hard critique, but in a positive, like, here's how you could grow sort of way. And I was very surprised. It was taken extraordinarily well.
Great.
This is hard conversation. This is when I was expecting, doors to be slammed and a very angry result, but it went off without a hitch.
Good job.
Well, thank you, but it came from you. Thank you.
It's a hard conversation to do well, so that says a lot about how you execute.
It says a lot about the technique too. So because I can imagine if I had just came in hot, here's how to do, here's where you're fucking up today. It would have gone very different. So
that's plan B. If ours doesn't work, just try that.
No, it's violence. It was the violence. Violence is sometimes the answer. So this kind of reminds me of, I don't really do training very much in my world. I've just never really found a ton of value in doing it. And there's some backstory there. I used to work for eBay, and we had this massive phishing problem. And so we created this huge campaign around phishing and how to understand it, how to identify it, whatever. We put $1 million into this website, and phishing went up. We actually had more phishing. And when I saw those stats, I'm like, okay, well, at least all of the traditional ways to do education just do not work, at least online, do not work. This is all garbage. So that was the thing I was talking about. There are some types where you can scare people. There's certain ways to do it, but it's very limited. I was asked to come in and do a course once, and I really, really did not want to do this course, but the guy kind of convinced me to do it. And there was 2 courses, one right after another. Each were 4 hours, so it was a total 8-hour day. It was a long, long day. And I broke up the teams, the groups, into 2 separate teams, so red team, blue team, and I basically had them war game a situation. So one side was you get points for building an application on a whiteboard. You don't have to code anything, but let's draw it out, whatever it is. And the red team gets points for how much data they exfiltrate from the system theoretically. So they say, I use this exploit. Well, it would have worked in this example the way you designed it. So they get points for every time that happens. And so for the first, I would call it 10, 20 minutes of this, everyone was just oh, this sucks. Oh, it's horrible. But then something happened. And this is why I agree that what you're saying will work. Because if I had just had that first 10 minutes of those experiences, because it happened twice, it's the same day, 2 trainings, it was brutal. But that first 10 minutes, they're like, why are we doing this? Well, this team fucking exercise. I hate that guy over there. Oh, like, this is stupid. What are the rules? I don't get point systems. And they're just unbelievably non-compliant. Just, you could sense that they just really were like, everyone is just gritting their teeth. Like, why do we have to sit through this fucking thing? And then all of a sudden, like, they got the rules. They finally got it. And it was like slightly gamified because there's points, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden it just flew by. It was just super, super fast. And like they were getting anxious because they were looking at the clock now, like, oh no, we're going to run out of time. And there's like all this stuff we can do. And like, we need to try this. We need to do this. And they're like, and by the end of it, the teams independently would get like this massive argument about why one team should have won versus the other team. And like, they're so into it, like so into it. And I kind of had to break them up. I'm like, okay, the whole point thing, that doesn't matter at all. Like, but look at the whiteboard. Look how much work you guys did here. Imagine how amazing this app would have been if you would actually, put it out. Now, ask yourself the question, do you think I would have been able to break into it? And everyone's like, oh shit, yes, absolutely. and now think about all the apps you actually work on in your daily life. Do you think those are anywhere near as good as this app? And you could see they're all just like, holy shit, we're so fucked. And they all just like ran back to their desks. So a year goes by or so, and I start running into these guys at conferences, and they're just like, that was the best fucking training I ever had. And so it was that last, 2 hours and 45 or whatever, 3 hours and 45 minutes there, or whatever it was, where all of the barriers were gone. Like, they finally were working as a team. They finally got the point of what was happening. And that's why I think what you're saying, where you set the people down, you give them some task, just tell me 3 things about your life. That's not hard. Not anyone can tell you 3 things. That it's your life. Tell me 3 good things, 3 bad things. Like, it's your life. You can tell us whatever you want. I'm not even telling you what to tell us. Just tell us something good, something bad. I could see why that would, at first it would suck. Suck. It would really super suck. But as soon as you started seeing people opening up, you're like, oh, I see what's going on here. And this isn't like, just put me on a stage and like point a flashlight at me. This is like, everyone's doing something. We're getting something done here.
Absolutely. There's such an association with like team building or fluffy or woo woo or whatever. Yeah. We're not doing that. It's simply that we're basing our work on a conversational pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid is the results that you're going to get. Well, at the bottom of the pyramid, at the very base, it's how well are you listening to each other, and how strong are your connections and your relationships with each other and with what you're doing. And if you don't have that base, you don't get those results. You get very narrow results. And the more that you can expand that base, the more that you have the ability to work together to produce results. And when you don't have that base, it's not happening. And so in that situation, which is an awesome exercise, I think any experiential exercise that gamifies anything is brilliant. That's a really strong exercise. Not every team, or we're working with cross-functional teams, so they're not always working on the same project, although that's part of the work we do, is how do you get a project done cross-functionally. But so how do you create an environment where that same thing happens, and you use really simple techniques to make it happen? Because you have to build that relationship somehow. It's not about trust falls. It's about, it's really about having real open conversations.
Are you sure? I heard that works.
I've never done a trust fall. I have done some other team building stuff.
Young.
Yeah, we can do it. I mean, we want to do a trust fall. David, you carry me.
The table's pretty high.
It is pretty high.
The new person, you drop them. That's kind of the
yeah, only one drop though.
We'll be doing a desk pop later as well. The new guy. Okay, so that's an interesting point, though. Okay, so what kind of woo-woo things are you like? Thumbs down. Those things aren't actually helping anybody out.
I think the point that Justin's making is it's not that it's great. Like if someone goes out and does a ropes course and like that's fun, or they go and do an activity like that. But it's more interesting from my perspective if you are learning something quickly. Like here's a tool. Okay, now apply this to this really wicked problem that you're having to solve right now. That's this complex issue that you're trying to solve. And so you're actually like working on the issue you have to do, and you're building team while you're solving a business problem, because it's great. Yeah. You had fun, and that's worth doing, to do a ropes course. But
is it?
I mean,
I've had fun doing ropes courses.
Yeah, but
I do think they're fun.
Yeah, fun, but I mean,
but does it lead to a better team?
Right.
Now,
yeah.
I mean, again,
that's really what I'm after.
Yeah.
like, cause you're, and so that's the piece. I mean, have you really, like, does that really translate into better performance? I will guarantee you, after people learn our tools, the team will fundamentally perform at a totally different level. They'll go from a 6 to an 8 in a matter of hours, right? They'll go, but at ropes course, like,
let me give you an example. I remember one time I was brought on, I had a peacetime executive over me, and I was in the middle of a war, like a real one, like it's really gnarly stuff going on. And he's like, we're going to be doing like a offsite kind of lunch or brunch thing or whatever. And we're going to paint a mural. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Do you want me to keep the site on? Or do you want me to do that? Like, you have a choice here. And I'm just like, it was so tone deaf. It like was not at all like the kind of thing that made sense for a team building for my brain. Right. Like, wow, you are just not understanding how serious this situation we're in is. But I could see a situation where, like, no, Robert, we do need to come in because we're seeing performance problems amongst these people. And they took it seriously. That's what I guess that's my biggest problem, is a lot of this stuff doesn't feel serious. It feels like, oh, we have this new quiz we found in some magazine somewhere, and you're gonna take it, and I'll share your results. I'm like, come on,
yeah,
what a waste of time. Come on, well, how is this at all helping us communicate?
And in every single room I've ever stood in where they've never met me before, people are thinking that's what they're about to get. Yep. Because that's just how you associate with that kind of
before
stuff.
I read this book, that's what I thought you were going to recommend.
Right. Yeah.
Murals and trust walls.
Murals and trust walls. We really have focused. So we've helped quite a number of companies who have been at various phases, from startup, mid-market, and much larger, to make the scale, to make the next level scale. And we took the foundational tools that have been helpful in every single environment that we've worked in every single industry that we've worked in. We took those foundational skills, and it took us 5 years of writing it to do this, but we whittled them down to the seven competencies that we think any team will get better.
Okay, well, let's do it. Since you brought it up, let's do it. What are the 7 competencies?
Off the top of my head.
I actually have it written down if you don't want. Okay, all right.
You read them out loud.
All right. So we'll just do one at a time. Choose your mindset.
Yes. What is it?
Yeah, why don't you give a brief rundown?
Choose your mindset. So your mindset is like a pair of glasses that you're wearing. And if you're wearing orange glasses all day long, every single day, you sometimes might just kind of get used to it being orange. And a lot of times you forget that our mindset is actually just like those glasses. We can have one different mindset for one activity and a completely different mindset for another activity. You can be in a fixed mindset, I'll never get better at this, or you can be in a growth mindset. You can be thinking, I'm going to learn. You can be in a complaining mindset where you can't get anything done, it's hopeless, or you can be a creator mindset. We talked about the mindset of blaming somebody or challenging them to step up. So that is always a choice. And that is what I think a lot of people don't realize is, we've heard about mindsets. Okay, I know mindsets. I learned it in a training. But every single day, every conversation that you're in as a manager, or specifically an executive, you are having to see your natural negativity biases creep in, your natural dismissing, the natural blaming. It's all going to naturally happen. You have to be self-aware enough to be able to choose a new mindset, and you can.
Okay, so I have a bit of a mind hack about this one. So I have a very negative view on the world, just by virtue of always working in security. Everything's a vulnerability, everything's bad, right? So I'm just, wouldn't call it a cycle, but it's just very constantly reinforced to be aware of how things are bad. So at night, I say 3 good things that have happened that day, so that my brain starts, I'd be curious how you feel about this psychologically, but so my brain starts categorizing whether this is a good thing or not. So I'm constantly asking, is it good? Is it good? Is it good throughout the day? And sometimes it's like, that might be pretty good. And so I store it because I'm going to have to recall this thing at the same time every night, right? And then I might have an excess of things. So now I'm trying to categorize how good things are. as opposed to how bad things are and all the negatives.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that out of curiosity?
I think, look, the idea of having, of countering the negativity bias and starting to notice all the things that are going well is really important, because our brains are structured like the way, it's not just your job. Most people are overly focused on negative things.
Sure.
Because that's how you survived, right? Is this a rock or a bear, you know? And if the people who thought it was a bear survived, and the people who thought it was a rock didn't, right? So we're always looking for threats. We're looking for what could go wrong, right? But that's actually a bias. It's a cognitive distortion. It's actually not. We're not actually seeing the world as it is. And so starting to notice everything that's going well is really important in your life, and also in a business. You know, you talked about kind of wartime. Even during wartime, there's a lot of stuff that's going well, and oftentimes we're overly focused only on the bad things. And when you do that, it can be exhausting, because you actually don't notice some of the wins you're having, and some of the successes you're having, and some of the things like, whoa, actually we should be doing more of this. Like, this really crushed it over here. And spending equal time, like looking at all those challenges, we call this 10,000 feet, where you're looking at it. But if you only focus on the negativity, you will be burned out, and you will also go dark. And it's important to have an empowering context that you're operating in, and to do that.
When I was working on the anti-child pornography stuff, for instance, that was very quick burnout. Like, oh my God, that was fast. It only took me 6 months, and I was like, I'm done with that. And you can't unsee it. So
that's quite difficult.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're mentioning PTSD too, and those extreme situations can often be triggering beyond just the day-to-day.
That's kind of what I was asking about, the, like, what do you recommend? You cycle out. You're only allowed to do it for a certain amount of time, and then you go do some murals.
That might
murals would have been great. That would have been great for you. Hey, we're going to do some murals today. You'd be like, I'm all in, baby.
There's a psychologist that I really like named Gabor Mate. Is that how you say his name? And he talks a lot about trauma and leadership, and that's really relevant. It's a distinct aspect of our experience. And if we're coming from a traumatic reaction, there's other things to consider. And actually, doing the murals and doing creative activities and finding time where you're actually stepping away from the intensity and finding outlets for the other side of your brain to kind of get it online. That's often a part of trauma recovery, and there's many other things that are part of it too.
You know, it's interesting. We were talking before the podcast a little about Stoicism, and, you know, I think, some of the Stoics had horrible things happen to them. They lost children. They had incredible illnesses, and they're talking about focusing on noticing all the incredible things that have happened in a day. And
gratitude.
Yeah. All the gratitudes. And these are people who've suffered horrible things, personally. And that's kind of part of how it was born and what's so powerful. Right. So it's really critical to
imagine being alive in those days. I mean, everything's a tragedy back then.
Yeah.
There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which I have a quote from in the book, but it's written by a psychologist named Viktor Frankl, psychologist. And he was in the Holocaust and was in a camp. And his entire psychological approach since coming back was based on what he realized was that the way that he was going to get through this was he was living in the worst atrocity that man has seen, and he would just focus all day on, if he was in a closed room, the sky through the window, and he would just focus in this and have it be what he centered his mind on. And a lot of what he did in the work that he did following that was based on that experience, and also the precursor to positive psychology, which there is a lot of data to show doing exactly what you're doing. Journaling 3 things a day is actually reframing your mind before you go to sleep. So you're also programming your subconscious with there's some things that are going well. And it, there's a thread of this in positive psychology. It's not about optimism for the sake of optimism. It's about being in really fucked up situations. And even in those situations, can I choose a new mindset? And I think in the leadership field,
especially important.
It's every day, man. Like that's the job of leadership is how do I deal with the complex problems that are showing up today and all the people issues, and like, can't people just learn how to communicate with me? Like if they could just do that, we'd all be better, but it's not happening. So, it is an important part of this work is that choosing the mindset.
You guys kind of reminded me of something I saw online. There was a POW guy who I can't remember. I think he fell overboard or something, and they got caught, and he was held for maybe a couple of years or something, and he pretended the entire time to be, mentally retarded or something, and just like practically drooling, constantly reciting like the same things over and over and over and over again, kind of thing, and kind of a dead face, just really playing the part, right? But his the other people on it, or at least some people within his group, the other Americans or other POWs, knew that he was totally functioning and like normal. So he basically had free run of the camp. He was allowed to do whatever he wanted because they just thought he was just so stupid. And meanwhile, what he was actually doing is memorizing every single serviceman's name so that they were pretty sure that they would release him first, because what value does he have as a POW? They released him, and he was able to give the names of 265, I think, if memory serves, different POWs. So that's that kind of purpose, and you can reframe it like, I'm here on a mission. Like, this is a real mission. This is important stuff. You know what I mean? That was a terrible situation he was in. I mean, no doubt about it, but he made the best of it. And
I think for most of us, I mean, you're in security, so maybe you're seeing some things, but in a lot of the environments that we're working in, we're not dealing with that immediate threat, but our brains are activated exactly as if we were. I mean, it's not any different. We're still experiencing it as constant fight or flight, constant stress.
But that guy had hope. I mean, why bother doing it if you don't have hope?
Absolutely. Well, that's why, that's a far more extreme situation. Sure. And it is an exceptional human being that can do that. But that's what makes us exceptional, is that ability to do it. And even in a manager position, you're going to feel beat down, especially that first year. There is no way you're going to get into a manager position or in a new executive position and not just have the onslaught of everything is new. I'm relating to myself differently. And there are going to be times when you think I'm going to give up. And it is about drawing from ideally yourself, but also from your team. And we want to build teams that coach each other to shift their mindset and help each other get back, because everyone's going to have bad days. Everyone's going to have the negativity bias. But if you coach each other as a team, you're relying on each other to bring each other back.
Mm-hmm. All right, next one is get real with each other. So I'm just going to tell them that they've got bad breath and they got something in their teeth. Or, I mean, what do you mean?
Yeah. So we talked about this earlier. This is the getting real practice. So part of where this comes from, you mentioned the Navy SEALs. Google did the study called the Aristotle Project that looked at what has teams perform at exceptional levels. And they were really surprised because they had a lot of assumptions and theories about it. And the number one trait, far and away, far beyond anything else, was psychological safety. Do people feel psychologically safe to say what they actually think? And when they do, the performance of the team skyrocketed. And when they don't, and it was, by the way, everyone on the team. It couldn't just be like one person who happens to be friends, with the CEO. And so when they do, the performance skyrockets. So how do you create that? So we talked about one of the ways we create it to create that psychological safety, so that basically people can be vulnerable with each other. And once they can do that, then their ability to challenge you on something and say, hey, I really disagree with your strategy, with all due respect, but they know you now personally on a level. You've shared some things. You've been vulnerable. They've been vulnerable. There's some human connection. And so when that trust is there, they can actually tell you the truth. And you've heard this before, like, when someone gets promoted to general, one of their mentors will say that's the last time you're ever going to hear the truth. And so how do you make sure that when you're a leader, that you actually you're having the real conversation? Because typically what happens is that people are talking exactly about what the problems are and what needs to be fixed. And then as soon as the CEO walks in, the conversation gets politically correct and they stop talking about it. Or they're having it one-on-one, or they're complaining, to their spouse at home about it. You actually need that conversation on the team. And if you can have that, the performance goes up dramatically.
So you've mentioned politically correct a couple of times now. So are you saying, like, I need to be able to say any words at all in safety? Is that what you're getting at?
Things that move the action forward, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like if I have an opinion about your jacket, like that's not that interesting.
What's wrong with my jacket?
No, your jacket is phenomenal. I mean, that's not a good example. It looks really good.
But if I have something about like, hey, there's something that we're doing right now that we shouldn't be doing. Like we're spending time over here, and if we knock down this domino, we can knock down 1,000 dominoes, and we should not be spending time here. I'm thinking that. I don't say that. I need to be able to say that.
We were working with the executive team, and basically what we're talking about here is the elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room, and it's a thing that nobody's saying, but everybody knows. Working with an executive team, we're having the hard conversation. We say, basically, are we at a level 10? If a scale of 1 to 10, everyone's being nice, to level 10, we're saying what we need to say. Where are we? And the CEO's thinking, we're at a 10. And everybody else is saying 7, maybe 6. So we know there's something that has not been said. And finally I said, okay, well, what would it take to get to a level 10? Let's imagine you've had 3 beers. Then you're really willing to have a conversation. What would you say? And then, of course, somebody says, well, since you said the thing about the 3 beers, if that's really where we're going.
Because I'm buying.
Here's what I would say is the CEO is involved in every single thing we do, and we can't make decisions on ourselves. And it was like the room just went. And then what was unsaid was said. And then we had to work that out as a team. Okay, now what does this mean? And the CEO was like, shit, that's not how I've seen this. And so we had to, really open up that and start to create a different line of conversation because the elephant had just been named. And so how do you have that? How are you safe enough to have that conversation where the elephants in the room are named? And that means safety, meaning people aren't going to jump on you and argue with you and tear you down just because you said something or punish you because of it or, get into this massive disagreement about, no, that's not true. It's really just, can we actually talk about this? Because some people are experiencing this. So can we have that conversation? That's a level 10 conversation. And then when you start to name the elephants, you don't have the elephants there. And then you start having team conversations about shit that actually needs to get done. And you start getting things done differently because you're open, you're honest, you're level 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of times sales, they can't sell because product hasn't built the thing that they can sell. But somehow percolating that all the way back to the actual developer on the ground who could make the change is impossible. There's just too many groups of people who are, gatekeeping between there. And so the developer's kind of blissfully going about his day, no idea that sales is absolutely livid. And unless they can find the guy and literally choke him out and say, why aren't you building the thing I want? Like, he's just going to keep going, doing the thing. So if you don't have the open line of communication and you can't kind of quickly get to wherever you need to go in the company safely, it's just never going to happen. And so sales will always be frustrated. You'll always see a decline in what your revenue could have been, and you'll lose your best people.
Well, I think what's important, especially is on that executive team, is, like we're talking about, if there's the divide is there on the executive, if that divide is in the organization, it starts at the executive level. We really try to look at where can we make the most impact the most quickly on addressing the cultural challenges, and 100% of the time, you got to start at that executive level and really address the breakdowns that are going on between them.
So out of curiosity in your experience, it seems like it's always sales, marketing, and product. Those are the 3, right? Everybody else is kind of in their own lane. Finance is doing finance stuff. Occasionally, finance has a bad thing that breaks finance, but generally speaking, it's just one of those 3 groups that are at each other's throat about something. Do you find that, first of all, is that true in your experience? And then also, is there one team in particular that stands out that seems to be more or less the problem child?
My observation is it has more to do with the team culture than the actual, there is always that tension, of course, between sales and product. And that's always going to be there. There are teams that...
And marketing and product. I've seen
the
same thing.
Product. There's issues with HR. There's issues with operations.
Yeah, but those always seem, yes, those occur, but those, it's like 1 out of 10.
Common challenges for HR.
The
common challenges for HR is often that they're not seen as an integral part of the executive team. So they're actually not, they don't have the voice, they don't have the seat at the table and being able to speak to the culture that's getting ignored.
I see.
So it's not the case. It's just that you see certain dynamics maybe play out, but these silos are real and they happen inside of that executive team. There's not an executive HR person on that seat who actually has a voice, it's being heard. Guess what is happening in the organization? HR is relegated to being kind of a segment of the company.
I'll be honest, I typically do think of them as a segment.
Exactly.
But because they're not the loud ones in the room, because they're not the ones who are constantly in conflict. I think that they are just more reserved. They're kind of in their own lane, doing their own thing, and they probably do need to speak up a little bit more.
It might be that they literally don't have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
That's actually, it's not that they're not speaking up, it's that they're not being heard. And that's where I would really challenge that. I think a lot of it is it's not being prioritized, it's not being heard. And so, when we're talking
and what
about,
does that cause in the case of HR? Just not getting the right head count in, not the right culture isn't right. Like, what's the problem?
The CEO is at the nucleus of the culture. The CEO who outsources culture to HR has outsourced one of their primary jobs.
Interesting.
And that's what often happens. And so we want HR to have that seat, to have that partnership at the table with the CEO, because they're the ones that are executing that strategy around the culture, which, as we defined, eats both strategy and M&A for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And so you want to have the voice of HR that's not being relegated. You really want to be able to create an executive team where there is a diversity of opinions that are based on competing commitments. So there are competing commitments in each of these departments. And that's why the head-to-head. It's not because salespeople just inherently don't like marketing people. I mean,
I don't
development
know that
people.
That's true.
I don't think it is. I think that there's just different styles. We talk a lot about adapter style. It's chapter 5 of the book is adapter work styles. So that as a salesperson who might be more naturally connection oriented, who might be more very connecting to people and ideas, and working with a often structured mind.
I'm going to introduce you to some marketing people. Feel the iron.
I get it. I mean,
there's fucking sales guys.
You're on the development side.
No, I'm kind of neutral. These are just friends who are just like, I can hear them seething. I can literally hear their voice right now in my head going like, he doesn't know what you're talking about. Sales sucks.
That's the silo.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
But also sales are like, what does marketing know? They're not out there. They don't know customers.
And they're
in their ivory tower. They never talk to customers.
Absolutely. And that's the CEO's challenge, is that's happening. Is that kind of stuff is happening. That's a CEO's challenge, and it's unique.
It's cool. All right. So we talked about the fundamental why already a little bit. Anything else you want to bring up on that one?
So we've talked about how, again, in a workforce, you think 70% of your workforce is likely to be disengaged. So you're spending all this money, and people are talking about they want more resources, they don't have enough people, and like you're flushing 70% of your dollars down the toilet, right? Well, how do you actually get them engaged? How do you lead in a way where you get them engaged? Now, your caveat aside, you might have some players that don't need to be on the team, but what about the players like you at this job where you were being thwarted in some way? You actually wanted to contribute, and there was something actually in the way, and you just couldn't perform well. If you can understand what a person's fundamental why is, what motivates them, what engages them, what matters to them, and it's different for different people. It's different for salespeople, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of salespeople, it's the connection. They can be coin operated. They can be from a marketing person. They're going to have a different motivation, but it varies from person to person. But if you know what gets people out of bed, what has them be on fire, what matters to them, your ability to manage them and speak to them is totally different. If you speak to them in the same way, you're not going to engage them. And most managers don't actually know what matters to people. They're just like managing, like they're just kind of, like you said, these executives, they were just kind of giving, like saying like, this is what we're going to do, and just kind of telling you. They weren't connecting to you. They didn't know what your world was like. That the peacetime president who didn't actually even understand your world, he didn't know what was a matter to you. Like you were protecting the company. We're
conflating different stories, but yes, your point is valid. Let me give you another, what I noticed in this one company I was involved with was as to why. I think the why is what I'm after here. My why at that company was, I know that this company is one of those kinds of companies that has like the really hard problems, like no one has ever solved this problem kind of problem. Not like, oh, I just installed this software, we're good to go. Like these are brand new, earth-shatteringly complex. Like you're going to have to get the best and brightest in the room. And we may not solve it. It's like not known if it's solvable even. Give me those problems. That's what I'm after. Like, I don't like you. There's all this other stuff that needs to get done. Yeah. You've got 50 people who can do that job, but there's only a very few people who can do this very specific weird thing. And I don't even know who the developers we have in the company. I'm going to have to go scour our developers for the guys who will actually stay up all night reading the source code and come with their own ideas, and they'll probably be wrong, and we'll have to fight it out, and it'll be hard work. And we're just going to take over a conference room for months. And then we come out, we're like, oh, we did it. We've solved it. And it's done. On to the next hard problem. If you had told me that I was going to be doing busy work, like, just, changing the color from blue to a slightly different color blue or whatever, like, oh, let's test this thing. And if this photo works better than this photo, I would have just, oh my God, I don't think I could have survived. So that why is very different. Where other people would go like, oh man, I finally get to like A/B test all the different colors of the rainbow, and they would have lost their mind about how interesting that would have been. And so I think there really is something to understanding people's motivations. I had another guy in the podcast quite a while back now, and he was basically doing stuff around neurodivergent people, where he said, they have a very different way that they need things structured and handed to them. But when you get it right, they're like hyper performant. They will they'll just blow everybody out of the water. But if you treat them like a normal employee, if you just go in and, pal around and, punch them in the arm or whatever, like, what you think management looks like on TV kind of thing, like they won't do anything. They'll just sit there looking at you awkwardly. Like you have to approach them in a very carefully crafted, unique way for their specific needs. Some of them are extroverted. Some of them are definitely not. Some of them ADHD. Some of them don't. And and some of them have like multiple things going on at the same time. But once you get it, once you figure it out, some of them have to work from home. They can't come to work. I'm sorry. That's just, I can't get anything done there because there's too much noise, too many people talking to me. Right. I think that is a really valuable way to start processing people, because some of those people do make it into executive management. They're just the best performers, and they just keep getting promoted, and they're kind of in the job, but they're hyper performant again, but now they're having to deal with these, political issues and palling around and someone punching them in the shoulder and expecting them to get things done in a way that you might expect like a average normal person to react to normal conversation, let's say. So what do you think?
Yeah. Mark Cuban has this, I heard him speak, and he was talking about that he runs all of his organizations. He follows this principle called KNP, know your peeps. And like the idea is that like you need to know each individual person, and know like what do they like, are they neurodivergent, for example? We're talking about the fundamental why, which is like the fundamental thing about what matters to them. Like you just said, this is the most important thing. Like put me in this kind of a job, I'm going to get excited. Put me here, I'm going to, I'm going to want to kill myself, basically, right? Right. So like, if you don't know that about you, if some person doesn't know that, they're not going to get the best out of you. And so everybody's a little bit different. And it's also just understanding a little bit about you as a person. Like you mentioned the neurodivergence as an example. And I think that's really critical because, people are not, when they're leading other people, they don't realize they're leading people. It's almost like they're giving instructions to a computer. Like they're just like, as if it's just bits of information. They don't realize that like, if I am communicating to you, it's sort of like me throwing you a ball. And if you don't catch it, it's not, even if I think I was clear, it wasn't a good throw. Right. And so how I'm communicating to you is really important. And the way that I'm going to be more effective is if I understand you, I understand how to communicate to you, who I'm speaking to.
And their fundamental why.
Yeah.
And a business has a fundamental why, right? A business has a purpose, a team has a purpose, and an individual has a purpose. And a lot of times, like if you go to a meeting and a meeting sucks, it's partially because we don't actually know what is the purpose of the meeting. Like, what exactly is the purpose of the meeting? Can everyone say this is the purpose of the meeting? And And if it's not written down, it starts losing its focus.
Okay, I have this fairly common conversation I have with product managers, especially new product managers who've never done it before. I did product management for many, many, many years. And I'm like, there's only one kind of group in the room that just seems to consistently annoy the crap out of me. Like, it's not the engineers. You can have some executives in there. It's fine. It's actually the project managers. Not all. There's been a couple who've been extremely good over the years. But the vast majority of them, they want to get things done. They have an agenda. And we're like, we have to hit this by the end of the agenda. I'm like, who invited this person? Like, no, we don't have to do any of those things. What we need to do is understand whether this thing can ship at all. Like, we have fundamental problems here. We don't, like, the timeline doesn't matter at all if I can't get that engineer to recite back to me how he's going to build this thing in a way that's not going to break the site or whatever we're talking about. And then it'll turn out that the engineer has no idea what they're talking about, and we're in really bad situation. And I can sense that the project manager's like tapping, like, okay, we need to get back on schedule. Like, when this is happening, I'm like, no. We have such a much more important problem in front of us here. Like, forget the timeline. Like, just please leave, is really what I want to say to them. Like, just get out. But I don't know how to deal with that sort of situation where somebody has a job and they're on rails. It's like they're an NPC or something. They're so divorced from what's actually happening around them that you're not. It's like all the subtle cues of this is more important than your arbitrary timeline thing you're trying to create is. How do you go about having that conversation constructively?
Well, because you're asking it in this way.
Because this is the why. My why is I need this project to work. Your why is I need it out in a very specific time. Well, how about we get it working first, and then we talk about the when, And
I think what's important is your why is what your why is, and the project manager's why is 100% to have this team masterfully execute on time and deliver ahead of schedule, if not on schedule. Mm-hmm. That is their why. That is their fundamental commitment. And that project manager is having the same experience that you're having with them. They're having it with you. That's what's happening.
I know.
And so you have a divide of competing commitments.
Sure.
And if I'm your coach,
sure.
I'm saying, all right, I need information from their perspective. Go learn it from their perspective. Go sit down with them. Now, if we're on an executive team, I probably have interviewed that person. But you're going out.
It's been a while since I've been in product management,
and then you're learning. What do they say? What are their comments about this? Yeah. And we're getting their side of the reality that you're in. Mm-hmm. That's how all dynamics are. There's your side of the reality and their side of the reality.
Sure. And
both are true. In my perspective, when I'm the coach, they're both equally true. And man, it's easy to get bought into one side.
Sure.
It is really, David and I often have to check each other. Like, wait, did you just talk to him or did you talk to anybody else? Cause we're like, oh man, it was so compelling what Robert was saying. It was so compelling. It seemed so true. And then we go do interviews with 4 other people who are saying, no. That's not what we see at all. And so, how do you manage that? There are competing commitments. And that's why, knowing each other's fundamental why and getting like, oh shit, the reason that this tension is happening is because we're at odds in our why. And
you're right. I am right. I had never kicked anyone out of a meeting for trying to keep us on schedule. I have tersely talked over them and continued the conversation that needed to happen, but not for lack of wanting to use violence. But okay, so give feedback like a coach. That's the next one.
Well, this is one we've been talking a lot about, kind of earlier on. But the idea of giving feedback by like a coach is, we want to bring out that peak performance. We want to bring out people in the zone. Where they're so immersed in their work, they're doing the right work, and they're just getting better and better and better, and relating to a team just like a sports team. You're coaching each other to get better. The point of being on the team is to develop constantly, day to day. We're talking feedback every day. But when you think about feedback, a lot of times feedback just means criticism. But when you're doing design thinking, for instance, that's not what it is. It's objective inputs. Like, let's try this out. How is it going? Here's what's going well. Focusing on this is working, this is working, this is working. Here's an area for improvement. And just making that a regular way of communicating as instead of the end of the year performance review, where you're coaching each other, and a manager is coaching, and the great manager is one who's also receiving coaching from their team. They're also taking feedback, and they're growing and they're learning. So there's a sort of a bidirectional way of giving feedback.
Back to the project manager thing for a second. You're just making me think about this a lot. So I've had 2 project managers that I thought were excellent, like truly excellent, and they could not have been more different.
Yeah.
Like, one of them was absolutely ultra type A personality, like this needs to be done at this time and blah, blah, blah. And she'd like quadruple check everybody, and she's all over everybody. And yeah, people just wanted to get it done because they knew, oh, she's coming around the corner. Like, oh, yep, we're almost done. They did not want to mess with her. She was like all on top of it. And in situations where I had like, this is really important stuff, she stood down, she saw what was happening. She's like, okay, this is more important. If we can't get this solved, none of this stuff, she got it. She really understood. The other guy was like, I don't know what drugs he was on, but he was like the most relaxed, just, put his feet up, just chilled out guy I've ever run across. Like, you would have like run across on a beach. You're like, is he dead? Like, did this person wash up on the shore? Like, he is so relaxed. And what he would do is he'd say like, hey, so yeah, guys, what do you think? Do you think you can get it done on time? And the guys were like looking at him, and he's just, they want to have a beer with the guy, He's like, yeah, I think we could do it. It's like, oh, really? That's great. That's great. Oh, great. And they'd write it down, and he's like, okay. Anything you don't think you can do on time? And people are like, no, I think I can do the whole. He's like, that's great. You write it down. And I'm telling you, I don't know, he must have been on pot or something, but like a lot of it. And he just like walk out all bleary eyed, and everyone would get stuff done. Yeah. They would like be on time. They're like really attentive, and he never had to follow up on them because like they didn't want to mess with that guy. He'd show up in the meeting. He's like, oh, you're missing a deadline. Cause sometimes shit happens, right? Oh, is there another way to do it or something? And they'd come with ideas to like make him not have to think or be upset or like harsh as mellow. I don't know what was going on. So I don't think it's a personality. It's something about getting the other people to get them bought in on wanting to do the task for this project manager. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was amazing to watch. I'm like, you put them in the room together. They couldn't even talk. Like, one's like, and the other one's like, a word a minute kind of thing. And I love them both. I think they're both amazing project managers.
Yeah, it's like 2 different forms of building relationship, right? So one, they don't want to disappoint the first person, right? Because they just, she's coming, and and the other person sort of, he sounds like he actually had empathy, and he actually cared about people, and people didn't want to, and he so that
cool
also
guy.
worked.
He was the cool guy.
When you care about the people that work for you, genuinely care, empathetically care, they care for you. And that's how it works.
I've seen a lot of memes recently. I'm curious what you think about it. It would be something like, you can't treat your employees like family because you can't fire your family and, decide to like, ship them off to wherever, you can't do that. Like, your family is your family. You have to treat them nice, but you can do that with employees. You can totally mess with them. You can, dock their pay and, do all kinds of terrible things to them. Obviously, you can do terrible things to your family. I wouldn't recommend it.
Totally.
But what would your take be on that?
I have a pretty strong opinion. The book is named Be a Better Team by Friday for that reason, that a team itself is an amazing thing. It's the sum of all of its parts. And the goal is that that people are thriving on the team, and that the best of each individual is coming alive to produce something great. That's what a team is about. That's not the purpose of the family. It's also beautiful, and having a beautiful family is a great thing, but this is distinct. Having a great team is distinct. And so, yes, I actually do encourage, we even at Blue Case decided
better than your family. Then it sounds like
we
better dynamic.
We call it a structure, an island of integrity, so that you don't get to choose out there, if people are going to do what they say. You can't do that. But on a team, when you're the kind of team where every single person knows that when you say you'll do something, you'll do it, and vice versa, that you create that together. You get to make that happen. And when you have a great team, it is, it's different than your family, but it's invigorating like nothing else. And it's something that you can trust, that you can come back to. The world doesn't work like that. But when your team is operating with high integrity, high ownership, and high communication, you got a great place to be. And that's different than a family. And you don't want to talk about like a family because of all those dysfunctions and all that stuff that are often associated with a family. And you can't fire your family. But on a team, everybody knows that they've got a role to play and you got to show up. You don't just get to phone it in like your cousin who doesn't really want to do anything. Everyone does have that responsibility. So that's why we call it a team and not a family. And I think that's a good word. It doesn't need to be this negative connotation.
I think people also use the family. When they bring up family, what they're talking about is there's oftentimes care and concern in a family, which is the positive part. Like we know the negative part, but the positive part is care and concern. And when you have care and concern on a team, it actually feels incredible. When the difference between a challenger and a persecutor is a persecutor, when you screw up, they try to tear you a new one. They're trying to tear you down. I'm going to tear this, and they'll say, I'm going to tear this person a new one. They come at you and they want to rip you apart. But if you ask people who've had a great coach, someone in their life that really made a difference for them, like a volleyball coach or whatever it is, they'll say, this person, they challenged me. And I've had a coach like this where he challenged me. He would push me harder than I thought I could run.
Run.
I was cross country and he would just push me so hard and he was constantly challenging me, and no matter what I did, he was pushing me harder and harder and harder. And I kept performing better and better and better. But I knew like he believed in me. He wasn't trying to tear me down. Like when he was yelling at me, like to run harder or push faster, adjust my form, I knew he was like, you're better than this. Like you can beat this, you can win them. And so it was coming from a place of like incredible belief in something even beyond. At that moment, I was so exhausted and I felt like I was giving everything, and he got another 20-30% out of me. Right.
That's great.
So
Amazing.
I think that's the difference in terms of like, what is their mindset? Is their mindset to tear down, or is their mindset to, that this person's incredibly innovative, incredibly resourceful, and they're going to challenge them to bring their best.
But the family piece is important because it's well-intentioned, because it is trying to get to a lot of business environments have not included care and concern for each other. And we 100% stand for it. If you have a more caring culture, you have a more creative and collaborative culture, and you have better results. And the companies we work with, when the culture gets better, when the culture gets more caring, things do get better for the business bottom line as well. It's very important to us that's always front and center. So when you say it's a family, it's well-intentioned, but it also has a shadow to it. So how do you create the best of the family and the best of what?
Just avoid that terminology.
Yep.
And that is something that we have chosen actually to take on too.
Yeah.
Instead of be a better family by Friday.
Yeah, it's not be a better family by Friday. It's be a better team by Friday.
Got it. Okay, so you said the next one is adapt your work style. So this sounds a little to me like what I was talking about with the neurodivergent thing. Like, I'm guessing, right? Is that the core? Like, this person needs to be worked with in this capacity, in this way. They need to be talked to with these certain intonations. I can't come in with Socratic method with this person, etc. Like,
yeah. Well, this is based on something called the tilt, and the idea is that this is a leadership style assessment that we use, and the idea is that you're not your tilt, but you tend to tilt in a particular direction, right? Like you said earlier, like you care about big things, basically. Like you care about things that are going to move the needle. That's exciting. Big problems. That's like, that's what you're hungry for. That's what jazzes you.
Impossible problems.
Impossible problems, right?
Yeah, those are the best.
Yeah, impossible problems. Other people really are very interested in the details. They want to spend time, oftentimes working. So your style is probably called the impact tilt, right? Mm-hmm. You're curious about why, like why should I care about this? And you want to create a big result, right? And you tend to move quickly, and probably can get bored if it gets too much minutia. The opposite side of that is another style called clarity tilt, very detail oriented. Researchers, rigorous,
Data scientists.
Data scientists.
Project managers.
They're oftentimes...
Get my gun.
Whereas you're like the change catalyst, they're oftentimes called the quiet genius.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll be in a room and they might not even share their opinion, even though they're the most educated person, unless you ask them. They want to be called on. You don't need to be called on.
Right.
You'll raise your hand and say, you won't even raise your hand. You'll start speaking and talk over someone. Right? Right? So these are like two different styles, right? Now the reality is those two styles work well together, right? You with a data scientist, actually, you guys are going to balance each other out. They'll slow you down a little bit. You'll speed them up, right? Mm-hmm. They'll help you not make mistakes. You'll help them go bigger, right? And then there's two other styles, connection tilt, and a connection tilt is the cross-pollinator. They're very driven by people, and also by big ideas. They also move quickly. A lot of times you'll see these people in sales, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of fearless, can improvise easily. The opposite of them is the structure, the mastermind, right? And the mastermind is they're the guardians. Very data oriented and results. They're the COOs, the how people, right? So if you think about the structures are the how, the impacts are the why, the connections are the who, and the clarities are the which, right? So each of these has different styles, and as a team, if you understand someone's style, you understand how to work with them better. You understand how you would frame the message. So if someone's coming to you, they should come with 3 bullet points. And in the first one, they should tell you why you should care about this. Like, this is one of the hardest problems we've ever seen. This has a possibility to change history. If you're talking to, a clarity person, you got to give them a lot of information, give them some details, give them time to think about it. Like, you don't want to surprise them right away. Like, don't make them necessarily speak on the spot. Tell them, hey, I'm going to call on you in this meeting. And I'm going to ask you some of these things. I want you to, and they're going to come prepared. They're going to have spreadsheets. They're going to have a PowerPoint, right? So you want to be able to adjust your style based on who you're speaking to, whether it's employees or customers.
The thing, it's funny you mentioned as an opposite, because I find like if I had to pick, I think you're right about impact, by the way, but if I had to pick a second category, it probably would be okay, well, this is really complicated. Let me go do a ton of research and then I'll come back with an informed suggestion or whatever, as opposed to just shooting from the hip. If I had to pick the second one, because I'm a data-driven person because of the Socratic method, and I want to make absolutely certain I'm not giving you terrible advice. In lieu of better advice, though, I will go the impact. I'll shoot from the hip because this is the information I have available now. Let's go. Like, why are we wasting time? Let's go.
Big reason the tilt's called tilt is because we tilt in different directions, and often our jobs will define which strengths are most important to cultivate. So sometimes there's a natural tilt. Your natural tilt might be impact, but because of the kind of work you've done, you're very data driven. You've really tilted towards that. You've cultivated that side of yourself.
Interesting.
And I would guess what you're really good at is figuring out, not just doing the research, but how are we going to solve the problem? Yeah. And I would really say, from hearing this, I would guess your impact and structure, because you're going to figure out how to solve the problem. So that's my guess, but you can tilt in all directions. Now, for a lot of people who are challenged by sales folks, that's that connection skill that, I'm a very structured person. And so sometimes people, I have like the best intentions in my communication, but they'll receive it as cold. And I'm just speaking kind of too matter-of-factly, or I'm speaking too much about the how, but I'm not thinking about how people feel. And so I have to surround myself with connection people to regularly get coaching, and how do I better communicate my message so that I'm thinking about how people feel? And that's my learning always, is like, how do I tilt more in that? That's such a challenge for me. And I think all leaders need to think not in what am I good at, but where do I need to build and focus and surround yourself by people that can kind of give you that feedback.
I think when I was younger, when I was a very young man, I had no idea how people felt. I think it's kind of an artifact of living on a ranch and just not being around many people.
Huh. What's a person?
I'm used to cattle and dogs and stuff, but unless I'm shooting at them, why do I care about people?
Where was your ranch? Where did you go?
It was in California, but it was in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, okay.
And but as I grew out of that and I went into the big city and had to actually interact with people and stuff, I found it it was more of an academic exercise. Like, what are people? What are they like? You know, and I'd have to like do analysis on it. And this is early internet, so there was not a lot of information out there. But the library still existed, so I could, you know, kind of do some research that way. Although I read extraordinarily slowly, so that took forever. So it was actually more just kind of like very slow, ugly trial by fire and just testing things out to see what worked. And I guess I learned to be an executive. I probably have closed, my guess is around 100 enterprise sales. So I am a high-performing salesperson, and I also have done product, and I've also done research and whatever. So I think I've hit at some point in my career all of these areas and had to brute force my way through being good at them, despite the fact I may not naturally want to do them or be good at them. There's a reason I chose not to be a CEO of the company. There's a reason I have somebody in that role, because I think he is better at that task than I am, or maybe not better at it, but certainly
more natural, maybe
more natural. Maybe more natural. I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it, because if you stacked him and I up, all things being equal, with everything else perfect, I might be better. Who knows? But for whatever reason, he is the natural choice, and I think we all agree. Everybody who we've involved in this company. So, I'm curious, like, how much of that is nature versus nurture? You know, is it really like you can brute force your way and be good at all of these things, or is it you're really going to have to specialize, or you're going to have these natural talents and you're going to, if you're neurodivergent, for instance, maybe you will absolutely never have these others. Like how do you feel about that?
Well, we had one CEO we were working with, or, you know, they experienced a lot of growth, and he was really focused on the financials. Really focused on it, because that's what he was good at, and he knew it, and they were doing really well. And so from his perspective, things were going well. We did what's called 10,000 feet. We got a bunch of people in a room and talked about what's going well and then what's in the way. And things that started to show up in our survey data that were talking about what was in the way was that people felt like he didn't care about the people that worked there. And he heard that feedback, which was, you know, objective feedback. And it was like, what? How is that possible? That's all I'm doing this for, is because I care so much about them. And we had to realize, hey, you have the skills to do it, but because you've been tilting so heavily structure, it's going to require making some shifts, first self-awareness around this, and then making some shifts. And what are some ways to start building connection more in the organization? How do you become more visible in the organization? How do you talk more about, you know, the people, what's important to you about the people? How do they hear you talking about this? So it's a lot of times it's just about the self-awareness to be able to actually adapt. It doesn't mean you don't have the skills, but we get pretty blindsided in our roles, and we're working with different kinds of people. The important part is to be able to shift.
Out of curiosity, you said that you think my secondary would be structure. Is the reason for that, out of curiosity, because I have a structure in the podcast, or is there some other reason for it?
It was because you want to figure out how to solve these problems. Okay. And that's why I guessed it. I'm guessing we will give you an assessment.
No. I'm not asking for free consulting, but I'm curious, like, what the clue was.
And you're results driven. You care about the result too.
Yes, also.
And so when you're digging in, you're not just digging in because you like the research. You actually care. You're actually trying to solve the problem.
Correct.
Versus some people just love, the research, it's so fun for them. You know, the forensic.
Yeah, they get stuck in academia almost.
You know.
Okay, so the next one is get focused. And I totally agree with this one. This is one I think nearly no one gets right. They're all over the place. They're doing all kinds of random things and throwing darts at the wall. And how do you fix that?
Well, so if you think about the 80-20 principle, you're probably familiar with this very common thing, 80-20 principle, which says that 20% of your results produce 20% of your inputs produce 80% of the results, and 20% of those actions produce 80% of those results. So the more that you can focus on the few key things, few key initiatives that your executive team or your team is focused on, having them well documented so that everyone on the team knows them and communicates about them. The idea is that you actually have too much going on probably in every team. There's just too much distraction. You could do 1,000 things this year? Can you get down to your big 3 for the year? Can you get down to your big 3 for the next 90 days? Can you get down to big 3 for the week and start to focus on what also can we remove from the list? What is no longer a priority, and getting really rigorous about creating plans that are built around 80-20, big 3, focusing on those few things that have the highest leverage impact.
And you know, you've seen this before, where most of a person's day is actually not moving the needle forward. Like the important projects, a very small number. And you know, the exercise, if you only had an hour to work to move the needle forward, what would you be focusing on? And you just do that as an exercise. And then I'd say, okay, great. Now I want you to spend 40 hours doing that, and create not to do lists and put it on the not to do list. And people understand the 80-20 principle. Like, they understand it, but they don't apply it. Because like the classic example is people are spending a lot of time answering emails, which actually oftentimes doesn't move the needle forward in terms of accomplishing what they want to accomplish. So how do you reorient towards what's most important and be spending all of your time focusing on those 1 or 2 big things?
Do you guys have a preference on style of communicating, like email, phone, Zoom, in person? Like what? I mean, there's a lot of Slack these days.
It kind of depends if it's the level of context, right? So if it's like an emotionally charged message, like you'd probably want to do that in person by Zoom, because text or email, it's going to be misunderstood, right? I think you also have to notice what the team norm is. Like, you know, we use Slack a lot because it just can be so efficient and fast. And so I think you have to define what the right norm is. Like, for something urgent, we might text. For simple things, we'll use Slack. If it's a complex project that we're formulating, we would put that in an email, or create a document. So it just depends. It sounds like. I think it depends on what it is and what is the level of context.
I am not a fan of Slack personally, because I find it's a more or less just text message, except big group text messages. So it's a big productivity drain. And there's always this weird expectation that you're going to be there. And I think that for me personally, I'm not talking about for teams. For me personally, it's sort of like, it's a massive invasion of privacy somehow. I'm like, you don't get to know when I'm looking at my computer or not looking at my computer. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to always not respond to Slack. It just like, no, thank you. You can text me or call me or whatever. There are certain teams that require, group messaging or whatever. But if that's the case, I prefer much, much smaller groups, like 2, 3, 4 people kind of thing, maybe 5, 6 max. But beyond there, it just gets too messy. And back to your, like, you get socially anxious when there's so many voices in the room. It's very easy to offend anybody at any time when you have these sort of nameless, faceless entities who might be having a horrible day. You're not looking at them. You don't know if they're in a good mood or bad mood or stressed out or whatever. And you're just like, hey, we're doing this thing. And they're overwhelmed already. And you're kind of coming in tone deaf. Like, there's no context there. If I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like, you can really hit people the wrong way.
Totally.
Totally not meaning to at all. You're like, it seems like a kind of a benign thing I'm asking for, but in these big group contexts, someone will have a problem and it'll just kind of devolve quickly. You get like 30, 40, 50, 100 people in these rooms. Like, you can't have productivity in there.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, sounds good.
I get it.
Stamp of approval. Okay, last one was get it done.
Yeah. Get it done, meaning, do you have clear plans of action? And even more simply, does every meeting end with who does what by when? And is that getting written down? And I like to just simplify.
That's pretty simple.
Who does what by when at the end of every meeting? That's what's going to get things done. Most teams, when I ask, have you written down after every meeting who does what by when? And is it clearly in display? Most will shake their heads no.
Yeah, of course.
And that's why execution is so poor, because this isn't documented. We're relying on our memories. Well, you said that you'd have it done. Well, no, I didn't. It wasn't a priority. And then it becomes a conversation. So building that discipline of who does what by when.
So you say document it. I'm curious. Do you have you mean like a task management queue somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we use Asana and we use Fellow, which is a kind of a link and through meetings. And that's what we use at our business. But anything that you're able to say, like status report, end of every meeting, this is what we've decided who's going to do what by
So
when.
it's publicly documented, not just in my notes somewhere.
With the team.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually what I meant. But publicly for the team, that the team can all see it.
Yeah. And now you're talking about ownership, accountability, and execution. And, who does what by when? That's a definition of accountability for us. The working definition of accountability.
So
who does what
by
about
weekly cadence type meetings or daily stand-ups or whatever? Do you find those to be good, bad? You have a preference on those?
I think meetings are another key piece of execution, right? So one piece is what Justin's talking about, right? And you need to have, the thing with meetings is that you need to be very, there are different types of meetings, and people oftentimes conflate all the meetings into one, right? So daily stand-up's going to be very different from like an annual strategic planning meeting, right?
Sure.
From a weekly meeting, from a monthly meeting. I think all of them are useful. They need to have you need to have a very specific agenda for them. About what do you actually, like a daily stand-up, like, okay, it's a daily stand-up. It should be, 5 to 15 minutes with a very particular structure, designed for a particular purpose, right? Different from a weekly meeting. So like a daily stand-up is going to be making sure people are like where they stuck, like, and so what they're stuck, what's the most important they're working on, sharing wins, for example. That's a good agenda for it.
And do you recommend them they actually stand up? Because I've seen it both ways.
I mean, the idea of stand-up to kind of keep it fast and to have it be moving at a brisk pace. And also, what's key about those is actually having people prepare. So it's just like when you're going around and saying, okay, quick wins, and it's a fast speed round of wins, most important thing you're working on, and then stuck, and everyone has it already written. So when they're coming to the meeting, they can say it has a fast pace. And the idea of the stand, it's like, then there's energy, right? Mm-hmm. That's why it's called a stand-up. And we've seen companies that do it every day. We've also seen companies that do it a couple times a week, right? A weekly meeting where you're actually like looking at, okay, what are those needle movers, those 2 or 3 things that are going to totally change the game? How are we doing on them? Red, yellow, green. And then, and then spending time looking at those key issues, like identifying what are the most critical issues, and then spending the meeting solving one of those problems. Pick one and solve it. Mm-hmm. So instead of the meeting is just like people talking and reporting, we don't think that's a useful meeting. We think that a meeting should be 75% you're solving problems and about 25% reporting.
I once worked with a manager who would come to the meetings with spreadsheets filled with everything that everybody was doing. I mean, spreadsheets. We could have gone through, and that they were well tracked. All this stuff, but things weren't getting done on the team because the spreadsheets just kept getting bigger. So it is about figuring out, how do you get very efficient?
Sounds like somebody I would want out of the meeting. Project manager with 1 million spreadsheets.
Well, when this is a manager, so it's a director, it's the director level. So it is something that I think also just requires learning of how to create strong structure to a meeting, which is fundamental why, agenda, write down the decisions that have been made and who does what by when, and having a practice of the parking lot. Which is
okay. Back to project managers for a second. So one because they're kind of, I don't know, they're kind of weird. The glue that makes things actually move forward. So when they're doing it wrong, boy, is it wrong, and it just derails everything. One thing that I'm kind of on the fence about is like Gantt charts, for instance. Like I could totally see why if I was about to, ship something to the moon or something, I would want a Gantt chart. I mean, I want it to be super organized, really well thought out. For software that it doesn't matter at all if this thing goes live today or tomorrow, it's like the earth will keep spinning and no one's going to die if this thing takes an extra day or two. But this person's spending like hours meticulously putting every single thing into this, and it's this massive, massive, massive document. And I'm like, your time could have been way better spent just going and making sure the engineers are actually doing what they say they're doing, and just double checking everyone and, softly asking them, hey, you need any help? Is there something that, are the requirements clear? Anything like that would have been wildly more helpful than this massive Gantt chart. So like, where do you stand on this?
Well, part of what you're saying is like that project managers, they're over tilting towards the system. And it's probably easier for them. They're probably more comfortable doing that than actually going and talking to people and saying, hey, where do you need help? Like the empathetic project manager that you said earlier, who people cared about. They didn't want to disappoint him. He was a good listener, right? And so sometimes that's what's happening is people are tilting towards what they're comfortable with.
Well, dead people who wash up on the shore, they don't talk very much. This guy was barely breathing, but your point is valid.
Okay.
Thank you. I love him. His name is Morgan. I'll sometime I'll get him on the podcast. He's one of my favorite people. Okay, I wanted to talk more about morale. You said it was like sort of the pearl in the center or the centerpiece of the company. Are there any sort of like massive, like red flag, flashing red alert things that you can point to that if you see these sort of warning signs, you know that the culture is going to go off the rails and then the company will go off the rails sort of things?
Well, one of it is, like you said, if you start seeing engagement scores go down, then it's just, again, you're now people who are A players and who are superstars. They want to be around other A players. They want to be around people who have a fire in their belly, who are up to something. They don't want to be around, bozos or stupid processes, basically. And so that's one thing. If you start seeing low levels of engagement in the company, it's just, you need to fix it fast.
And I think you're going to start seeing, interpersonal tensions on your team or your, specifically your executive team are going to start to seem like you're having the same conversations over and over and over again, and you're not seeing any results. You're going to have people they're spending more time arguing with each other than actually getting things done. You're going to notice that, hey, or maybe the opposite is true. You're having such nice conversations. Everything is just so great when you get together, but it seems like nothing is getting done. I think you're going to start to see the silo effect happen. You're going to start to see things just not working like they should be. And then you can, certainly assess and get data about that. But I think, particularly because we're working with so many CEOs, a lot of them are pretty driven by both data and instinct. And the CEOs that I work with typically have a pretty keen sense of like, God, something's off, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And it's just gotten a lot harder than it used to be. And that's really where it starts to happen. Like, I just don't quite get it. And how come there's not next level ownership in the company? How come
no one cares as much as I do?
How come nobody cares as much as I do? How come nobody cares? Well, the truth is nobody's going to care as much as you do. And that's part of the isolation of the job. And so how do you better address this and get the same level of ownership? And I think what happens for a lot of CEOs is they do have a few people on their executive team. They're like, I trust these two folks. I know that if I say, Jim, will you do this? Jim will do it. And then there's a couple other people that I'm not sure if they will. And then there's people on their team that I don't know what they're doing. And there's just a loss or there's a blind spot about that. And so I think that's more common, where it's not like the entire team is gelling and, you wouldn't say, yeah, we're having level 10 conversations. It's more like, it's okay. Things are okay. I feel proud of what we've got, but it's not quite working like I want it to. And why does it seem so hard sometimes when it should just be easier than this? I think that's where a leader or a company leader might start to notice these things.
You also see it, the classic where you have a startup, they have a tiny budget, a small team, they get the project done under budget, early, and then you have a large company with huge amounts of resources. It's, the product doesn't come out on time and it doesn't work and it's over budget, right? And it's like, how do you kind of create the same energy and shared understanding from the startup and that passion as you start to have a larger company? How do you create that? How do you have meetings in those startup companies? I was talking to one that was in AI, and I said, how is your retention? And they said, we have incredible retention. And I said, well, how's your pay? And we don't actually pay that well, but people were so bought into the mission. They cared so much about it that everyone was fired up. If you have meetings where you leave the meeting and it's that's kind of a waste of my life, I'm not going to get those 2 hours back. A lot of people will say that. That's kind of demonstrating something. Versus you go to a meeting, you're like, that was a really hard meeting. It was exhausting. It was like challenging. It was intense. But it was a good meeting. We accomplished a lot. That's how a meeting should feel. It should be like, wow, those were tough questions we were answering. That was a tough problem. I'm still thinking about some of those comments,
So how does this play with things like strategic planning, as opposed to, corporate culture? It's now like, okay, maybe our culture is okay, or maybe not, but we need to push forward. There's a bunch of initiatives coming up. Our competitors are eating our lunch. We are trying to go public this year. Like, there's a lot of things happening. Like, how do you kind of navigate those waters?
Yeah.
Well, as we were saying, we really relate to it as, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but you got to have a great strategy too. And so we're not going in there and just relating to the culture issues and the people issues. And then there's what the executive team is really working on. We see it as mutually necessary to address both. So that's why we're working with that executive team to make sure that they have a clear, easy to communicate strategy that can be on one page with 3 clear goals about what exactly we're doing that can cascade into the organization. So that there's better communication from that sort of top-down communication. There's a clarity around the vision and purpose of this.
Do you like go like offsites to do this, or do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll work with them as an executive team, usually first, to get clear on that, to make sure they've got that really clear, and we're working on the culture of the team itself. And then we're doing quarterly offsites usually with that team, but often when we're working with companies that are substantially larger and they're growing and they're seeing these next level leadership challenges, we'll go out and start doing group coaching cross-functionally inside of the company. So we'll bring people from your favorite teams, the sales and marketing team, are showing up, and then you're working with them. You're on the team too.
Just gonna kill each other.
And we gotta
get some mud, put it down, and watch them go at it.
We'll have to have some conversations about sales and marketing, but so you all are working together as different, people from different commitments inside the organization, and starting to build greater collaboration, greater cross-functional communication inside of our group coaching, and so that they're taking those group coaching sessions, taking our tools out into the organization and teaching it to people that work for them. So we're proliferating our tools from the executive team out through the management and director team out into the rest of the organization.
I've got nothing but love for sales and marketing, but you put them in the room together. Woof.
It's the project managers that drive you crazy.
Yeah, those guys.
Those were the ones that
die right in a fire right now. No. But it depends. Sometimes they're amazing, but way more often than not, no. I wanted to ask you one thing. We're getting pretty close to the end here, but I have noticed when companies are about to go public, they have like this, everything's great, and they have this, this big mission, as you say, and like everything's just, they have all this spirit and chutzpah, and they're like really, they got their shit together. Then they go public. And then they lose all their best people shortly thereafter. Maybe they keep them for 1 year or something, and the cliff starts going off, and their vesting cycle's out, and you start seeing them get pulled into better companies or bigger companies or smaller companies that are more promising or whatever. They're gone. And there's this sort of like growing mediocrity, and it's like it's just a middling of all the talent and thinking, and well, this is how we've kind of always done things, and we need to meet quarterly earnings, and it's like, well, we could make this big play, we could do this big piece of innovation, but it's a lot of risk, and we don't have any guarantees that's going to work. And would it move the needle anyway? Probably not. So why don't we just dump a little bit more into, we'll buy a company, let's say, and we'll dump a little bit of innovation, just as much as we need to combine the companies, and that's it. Oh yeah, all those best people left too. That's okay. We'll buy another company, and it just seems like this is a cycle. Is there a way to break that cycle? Out of curiosity.
One thing that I've seen is that sometimes in a company you'll have a particular team in a particular unit, business unit, that actually continues to be high performing. We noticed this. There was a company we were working with. They got purchased by a public company, and it was like you described. That was how the public company, but this division that this leader was running continued to be innovative, continued to be the profit center, continued to be all the wicked problems that you were talking about. Like they'd give it to him and his team. And so he was able to maintain that, and he had the support of the CEO to do things differently. Like, hey, I need some different operating principles here. We're not going to you need to give me some leeway. And he negotiated that before he went in. Like, I need to be able to do this. I'm not going to follow some of these policies that you have. Because, that's part of what happens as a company. Someone does something stupid, then they create a policy that then kind of interferes with a person's ability to do work. I remember this really innovative guy, brilliant physicist, whose company was purchased, and then he got by a public company, and he had to get his travel approved when he would go and he wanted to go over and like see, and it was like an approval process, and he was like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I have to go get I want to bring my team, and I have to get this like, this makes, they've just, he lasted 6 months, and it was painful to last 6 months.
Right.
He didn't even care about the earn out. He was like, no, this is not worth it. Right. That's kind of an example. Right.
Yeah.
So, I think that when you start focusing on kind of protecting and risk avoidance versus innovation and being disruptive, I think it can become a problem. So how do you kind of keep that innovative edge and have a company that still has those, we talked about values, but those values and principles that actually kind of keep that edge alive. Like, what is this? What are we about? What's our purpose? What are we really about? And how are we, and what are the, Netflix did this really interesting thing as a company. They created a deck about how to become a high performer. Like, if you wanted to be an extraordinary employee, they created this deck with like 150 slides about.
Is this public?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. About like, this is what it would be to be like an extraordinary employee. If you want to be great, follow this. Now they took the deck and now it's kind of simplified into like a few pages, but it was an interesting principle. Like, people, they had hired phenomenal people, but just because you hired phenomenal people didn't necessarily mean that they knew how to be great. So they actually trained people. This is what great looks like. Right. So how do you kind of keep that same thing? Musk does the same thing. I know he's controversial, but he'll have, like, he has the anti-employee handbook, right? And he has principles around, like, in his company to try to kind of disrupt some of these stagnant things. Amazon does some of those things as well, around how do you kind of keep that day one mindset, that innovative edge, right?
I think leadership is about principles. And so Ray Dalio, he's an example of someone running a massive company off a set of principles. He was very good at articulating those principles. But oftentimes, operating principles have not been defined. This Netflix example is an amazing one. It really is worth reading the slide deck.
Yeah, I'll try to find it.
But it really is. The ability to scale culture has to do with how well you've scaled your values and principles, which requires being able to document them and being able to be clear about, this is what makes us great at what we do, and having those principles clear, shared, understood, so that people know what they're buying into. That's also I think it's relevant for a company that's turned public, or a company that's grown really fast and added a ton of people.
Yeah.
And people coming in.
We had one of the companies we worked with, the one I mentioned earlier that went from 10 million to 1.3 billion. They had values, they had principles, and then underneath those values and principles, they had tools. They actually took our tools and sort of said, okay, here's how you actually would embody this value and principle. Like, here's 3 tools, and some of them were our tools, some of them were their tools. So then it got very behavioral about, you knew exactly how to be great. And it's kind of their example of the no rules from Reed Hastings that we were talking about.
Interesting. Well, I highly recommend the book. Where can people get it?
Book is available on Amazon. Be a Better Team by Friday. We are on LinkedIn. My name is Justin Follin, Follin, and regularly posting on there. And our website is bluecase.com.
Awesome.
And I'm David B. Greenspan. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Well, Justin, David, so much. This was great. Really, really great. And any last thing, like one bullet point, like, here's what a CEO should be doing right now, just thinking about? Communicate.
One thing, bullet point, I would say.
One thing. Leave them on a high note.
I would say, know the fundamental why of your entire team and be listening to learn right now in your organization. Doing listening tours. Going and getting feedback about what people are perceiving outside of your inner ring.
That's great. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.